Nearly a decade ago, a dimensional storm struck the Earth and shattered the world as humanity knew it. That catastrophic event tore open reality and revealed the existence of gods, spirits, monsters, demons, angels, elves, and countless other legendary beings that most people had only ever read about in ancient texts. These dimensional beings were organized into 4 distinct tiers: mortals, legends, epics, and mythicals, each category possessing destructive capabilities that completely shattered human understanding. Humanity, sitting at the lowest rung of the mortal class, wasn't entirely powerless though. People could elevate their standing either by cultivating primordial energy through disciplined training, or by hunting dimensional creatures and stealing their dimensional crystals. The second path, however, carried tremendous risk since the zones these beings inhabited were extraordinarily treacherous. With the world established, the story opens inside a classroom. A bald teacher is calling out the name of the protagonist, Joe Wen. When Joe fails to respond, the teacher completely loses his composure, which is understandable, given that the student is snoring away in the middle of class. The teacher genuinely cannot comprehend why the old principal spoke so highly of this seemingly hopeless individual. The scene briefly flashes back to the old principal telling the bald teacher that there are only 2 categories of geniuses in existence. One is Joe Wen, and the other is literally everyone else. Returning to the present the instant the bell rings, Joe springs out of the classroom without a single word, leaving the confused teacher wondering if the principal's judgment was completely mistaken. Joe sprints down the hallway and bursts outside into the tennis court area. Once he confirms he's alone, he pulls out his phone and quietly reveals that everything in his life changed the moment this mysterious device fell into his hands. The game loaded onto it is the entire reason he's been falling asleep in class and abandoning his cultivation sessions. All it takes is a single drop of his blood pressed onto the screen to unlock the secret game application. Before jumping in, Joe frantically scans his surroundings to verify nobody is watching. He then produces a needle, pricks his finger, and lets a drop of blood fall onto the screen to generate his character. The moment the phone absorbs the blood, the crimson liquid begins shifting and reshaping into an adorable chibi-style avatar that Joe controls within the game world. The game's core concept is straightforward yet extraordinary. Whenever this avatar's abilities are upgraded, those same improvements carry over directly into Joe's real-world capabilities. No need to risk his life out in dangerous monster zones. No brutal cultivation rituals. Pure, simple gaming. He quickly locates enemies within the game and launches a barrage of punches through his avatar, obliterating one ant with powerful blows. A second ant receives an equally fiery series of strikes for its trouble. As evening descends, the bald teacher is seen reflecting on the situation. He explains that within the Commonwealth, discovering a 16-year-old who can cultivate primordial energy is already exceptional. What concerns him is how few students match Joe Wen's dedication to bitter meditation and chai refinement without any external assistance. Every student at Goa High School had pinned enormous hopes on Joe, confident he would claim first place in the upcoming practical examination. But something happened a month ago that completely shattered that confidence. The story rewinds nearly a month. Students are gathered in a circle, buzzing with stunned whispers. Someone has issued a formal challenge to Joe, and what makes it even more shocking is that it's a girl. People are calling her absolutely insane for taking on the school's top student on her very first day of attendance. As the two face off at the center of the basketball court, Joe asks if they've met before. The girl skips the pleasantries entirely and simply tells him to come at her. In predictably reckless fashion, Joe charges straight at her, only to eat a gut-wrenching kick that sends him crashing to the ground like yesterday's garbage. One single kick. She doesn't even appear to have broken a sweat. The entire crowd is left speechless, unable to process that she put him down with a single blow. Everyone immediately starts demanding to know who this mysterious girl is. Back in the present, the bald teacher explains that ever since Joe was publicly humiliated by that girl, whose name is Jing, he has completely lost his drive. All he does now is sleep and play games. The old teacher is genuinely frightened that if this continues, Joe's future is finished. Honestly though, the old man might be worrying unnecessarily, because after clearing a wave of monsters in the game, Joe's avatar claims another explosion crystal, and as the primordial energy within it is absorbed, an arcane blue glow wraps around Joe's physical body too. When the blood avatar absorbs a primordial energy crystal inside the game, the player's real-world attributes are actually boosted. On top of that, the game provides Joe with detailed stat readouts that are invisible in the real world. A month ago, his numbers were embarrassingly low, but through gaming alone, the improvement has been substantial. Joe admits to himself that even years of dedicated bitter meditation probably wouldn't have produced results this impressive. His only genuine regret is that the crystals he collects inside the game can't cross over into the real world. If they could, even the low-grade ones would sell for enough to keep him comfortable for the rest of his life. As the game continues, Joe's avatar encounters another enemy, a red mutated vigor ant this time, noticeably faster and more powerful than the standard variety. He's confident he can take it down given enough time. But just then he hears footsteps closing in. It's Fang Ruoxi, a girl in shorts, and Joe is immediately gripped by anxiety. She absolutely cannot find out what game he's playing. If his secret leaks, he's completely finished. But abandoning this battle right now isn't a viable option either. He resolves to completely ignore her and play the part of a tech-obsessed student staring at his phone. Fang Ruoxi calls out to him anyway, asking him to join her team for the final practical test of the graduation examination. While keeping his focus on the game, Joe asks why she's choosing him specifically. Ruoxi explains that she needs genuinely strong teammates if she wants a high score in the combat portion. Joe tries to wave her off, pointing out that he's no longer the school's top student after what happened a month ago. But Ruoxi insists he's still the only person at Goa High she considers a real opponent. Joe brings up Jing, but Ruoxi drops a bombshell, and Jing has already transferred to another school. Joe is genuinely stunned by this. Ruoxi adds that it's still unclear exactly where Jing came from, but it's obvious she had already surpassed the mortal class entirely. Her appearance and abrupt departure felt almost deliberate, as though she came specifically to challenge Joe, then left. Ruoxi also mentions that she initially assumed Joe and Jing shared some kind of pre-existing rivalry, which would explain why Jing challenged him. Joe considers this briefly but dismisses it entirely, pointing out that he's never encountered Jing before and has absolutely no history with her. Ruoxi drops the subject and once again asks whether he's joining her team. Joe, spotting an opportunity to benefit from her leadership and skills while doing minimal work, agrees. Ruoxi considers it settled and explains she's already secured 2 other teammates. Beginning that same afternoon, all team members, Joe included, will train together daily. With that, she quietly leaves. Joe finally defeats the red ant and rushes to collect the dimensional energy crystal. But the moment he grabs it, a whole swarm of ants descends on him. He immediately shuts the game down and plans to examine the new crystal another time. Suddenly, an unsettling sensation washes over him. Both his phone and his body begin radiating crimson energy, and an intense, overwhelming feeling grips him. The crystal appears to be triggering this reaction somehow. Based on what he knows, the Vigor Ant Crystal seems to be a legendary tier primordial energy skill crystal, though he has no idea which specific skill it might bestow. Without wasting a moment, and reactivates the game to investigate. The instant he looks, he discovers that a brand new primordial energy skill has been unlocked. Later, all 4 members of the group assemble. Ruoxi introduces Joe to the other 2 members as their 4th teammate. The 2 guys raise their eyebrows. They're aware of Joe's reputation, but given that he hasn't trained in over a month, they're skeptical about his current capabilities. One of them, a blonde-haired guy, raises the point that their primary objective is to claim first place in Goa City's college entrance combat examination. He voices concern that Joe might not be the right choice and suggests they consider someone named Jung Yai instead. Joe completely understands their hesitation. The college entrance combat test carries tremendous weight, affecting everything from university admissions to career trajectory to social standing. Having capable, reliable teammates is a matter of both performance and personal safety. Their caution is entirely reasonable. Ruoxi argues that while Jung Yai is strong, Joe is still her top preference. The blonde guy then proposes a straightforward test, a sparring match between himself and Joe. Since he considers himself the weakest of the 3 existing members, if Joe beats him, he earns his spot. If he loses, he's out. Joe raises a concern about needless injuries, but the blonde guy brushes it off, dismissing strength measuring devices as meaningless. They'll settle it through a direct fight, with whoever concedes losing. Listening to this, Ruoxi privately worries for Joe. He hasn't used any dimensional crystals for cultivation, and his family is likely not wealthy enough to afford advanced fighting techniques. Despite her anxiety, she finds herself genuinely curious to see how he handles the situation. Joe suggests using the school's testing machines as an alternative to direct combat. The blonde guy scoffs and asks if he's scared. Joe simply scratches the back of his head, privately worried he might actually hurt someone with a single punch. They ultimately compromise and use the machines. Tian goes first, delivering a full-powered strike. The machine registers a strength score of 7 points. Joe notes that while the machine's readings don't perfectly mirror the game's values, they correspond quite closely. And a month ago, before he started gaming, his score would have been comparable. Tian then invites Joe to take his turn. When Joe's fist connects with the machine, the resulting impact echoes throughout the entire school. The bald teacher, who happens to be passing through the corridor, hears the noise and wonders aloud who could possibly be using the testing equipment during rest hours. He quietly makes his way to the machine room, eases the door open, and spots Joe and the others inside. The room falls completely silent as the machine displays Joe's result, 10 points. Even the old teacher watching covertly from the doorway is floored. He begins reconsidering everything. Maybe Joe hasn't been slacking at all. Maybe he's been training with such relentless intensity that catching sleep in class is the only rest he gets. The teacher even starts thinking the old principal's evaluation of Joe was entirely accurate all along. Roxy, meanwhile, is baffled but thoroughly impressed. Joe chose the most physically demanding striking method and still scored 10 points without deploying any fighting skills whatsoever. Tian is visibly agitated. He swallows his wounded pride and grudgingly acknowledges that Joe qualifies. But then, with what little dignity he has left, he winds up for one final punch. His fist crackles with thunderous energy as he slams it into the machine. The score climbs to 11. The effort leaves Tian completely drained. Joe gives him a genuine thumbs up. But then Joe asks something nobody expected. He wants to know whether the school will charge him for damages if he breaks the machine. The blonde guy confidently tells him he'll personally cover any costs. A faint smile spreads across Joe's face. Yellow energy begins gathering around his body as he prepares. The blonde guy inwardly rolls his eyes, assuming Joe is just posturing. After all, this machine is designed for serious strength assessment and can register up to 20 points. Practically nobody at the school has ever reached that threshold. But then Joe unleashes his punch, flowing with chi, and the machine begins to break down. Its circuits fry from the sheer force of the impact. Every person watching stands in stunned silence as the machine crumbles before them. The bald teacher is completely baffled. He knows this machine can handle strength up to 20 points. To destroy it outright would require a rank 8 or 9 fighting skill at minimum. In that moment, the principal's words about Joe being the ultimate genius flash through his mind, and he finally begins to understand what the old man meant. Even Roxy, who has always known Joe was talented, is floored by seeing it demonstrated firsthand. As evening settles over the city, Joe takes a leisurely walk down a quiet street. His thoughts keep drifting back to Nanjing. It genuinely baffles him. Why would someone who has surpassed the mortal class bother challenging someone still stuck within it? He's certain he's never left Goa province, so he can't imagine how or when he could have offended her. Out of nowhere, his phone rings. It's his father, asking if Joe will be attending his wedding. Joe, confused, asks who the lucky woman is. His playboy father promptly sends over a photo of an impressively endowed woman and cheerfully asks whether his son approves of his future stepmother. Joe asks about the timing and location of the wedding. His father casually mentions it's in about a week. Joe reminds him that his college entrance exam falls in the same week, so attending isn't possible, even though part of him genuinely wants to go. He then asks his father about an iron cookie box in the closet. His father, as clueless as ever, draws a complete blank. Joe describes it: a square iron box roughly 10 inches long bearing a cartoon bear design. The father then recalls it's a box from a bear cookie brand he used to eat as a kid, though that brand stopped production long ago. He's puzzled about why Joe is suddenly asking about it. Joe reveals there's a phone inside that cookie box and wants to know if his father placed it there. The father asks for a description: white metal shell, black screen, no buttons, approximately 7 to 8 inches in length. When Joe confirms, his father reveals the phone belonged to Joe's grandfather. Joe is completely stunned. He asks how his grandfather ever came to possess something like that. His father then shares a wild story. Joe's grandfather worked as a carpenter during the reconstruction of ancient Goa City, spending over a year working on countless traditional wooden structures. One night, while a small crew of workers were burning the midnight oil, they stumbled upon an ancient dry well on the construction site. Something inside was glimmering faintly. Convinced they'd discovered hidden treasure, the workers investigated and found a wooden box at the bottom. When they hauled it to the surface, light was seeping through its gaps. Inside that box was a phone. The screen was illuminated at first, but went completely dark the moment it left the well. The phone had no buttons and no charging port. It appeared to be utterly dead. Everyone was thoroughly let down. They concluded it was probably just someone's prank and moved on quickly. Joe's grandfather threw it into his tool bag and eventually forgot about it. His father adds that when he was young, he even tried to sell it at a repair shop in exchange for cigarettes. The shop owner called it worthless, so it ended up collecting dust in that cookie box ever since. He now wonders if Joe wants to try selling it. Internally, Joe exhales with tremendous relief. If his father had actually succeeded in selling it, this extraordinary device would never have landed in his hands. He asks whether the phone was ever turned on. His father confirms it was never activated. It sat untouched for decades. With that, his father wraps up the call, passes along the wedding details, and leaves it up to Joe whether he comes or not. After hanging up, Joe reflects on the fact that his combat test will take place in ancient Gua City. It might be worth investigating the old well for potential clues or leads. He returns home and starts restructuring his approach. Days pass and he settles into a rhythm, napping through classes, dozing under trees while other students train, and gaming through every available moment. Several days later, in one of the school hallways, two students are running at full sprint. A bespectacled student collides with another dressed in aristocratic-style clothing. The glasses student hits the ground hard from the impact, but the well-dressed blonde barely registers it. He simply continues walking with his entourage as people behind him whisper about how unsettlingly cold his presence feels. The next scene goes outside, where Tian reappears and announces he's leaving the group because a friend has invited him to another team. He walks off without much ceremony, leaving Joe wondering whether Ruoxi has any contingency plan. The exam is almost here and replacing a teammate this late is nearly impossible. Joe calls over to his other teammate, Li Jai, and asks whether he's heard about Tian's departure. Li Jai drops another bombshell. He can't team up with Joe either, and he asks not to be pressed for an explanation. Just like that, two teammates are gone. When Joe finally locates Ruoxi, she looks visibly deflated and sad. The moment she spots him, she quickly apologizes. But Joe tells her not to stress over it. He's actually the one who should be apologizing, because he's the reason people keep leaving. Apparently someone with significant influence has it out for him, which is why his teammates have been scared off. Ruoxi points out that she has no idea who Joe has managed to offend, but whoever it is clearly wields substantial power. She urges him to stay careful. Joe acknowledges this, and they go their separate ways. His mind is racing about the upcoming test. He's stressed about locating trustworthy teammates before time runs out. Even his most dependable ally, Ruoxi, won't team up with him given the danger that seems to follow him around. As Joe walks away, the bald teacher calls out to him. When they meet, the teacher reveals that Inspector Aang is a military figure whose complete name is Aang Qianzu. He asks if Joe knows him. Joe confirms he doesn't. The teacher finds this puzzling, because if Joe genuinely doesn't know this man, why would a high-ranking military officer publicly criticize a high school student by name during an official inspection of Gua City? Joe asks who this person actually is. The bald teacher explains the structure. The Earth Federation is divided into 4 zones: East, South, West, and North. Inspector Aang is young but hails from an extraordinarily prominent family. At just over 20 years old, he already holds a senior officer position in the Eastern Region military, making him a genuinely remarkable individual. Joe asks whether Inspector Aang is deliberately targeting him. The teacher says he can't confirm that, but Aang Qianzu did make remarks suggesting Joe was a poor student, and plenty of people eager to curry favor with the inspector enthusiastically agreed. Joe gets furious. He demands to know whether a senior officer of that stature doesn't understand how carelessly spoken words can completely destroy a high school student's prospects. He then asks whether Aang Qianzu might be connected to Enjing, the woman who humiliated him a month ago. The teacher says it's possible, but leaping to conclusions right now isn't wise. The most urgent priority is securing a team before the registration deadline, which falls the day after tomorrow. The teacher reveals that there's a student named Li Xuan currently enrolled at their school. If Xuan agrees to accept Joe onto his team, the teacher believes nobody will dare make trouble for Joe anymore. However, there's a condition. Joe must do his absolute best to help Xuan achieve a strong score, and Xuan must rank highest among the 4 team members. Joe asks if the old man is essentially telling him to hand his points over to this newcomer. The teacher confirms that's exactly what he's proposing, and that this represents Joe's only realistic path to participating in the examination. Joe agrees to the terms and asks the teacher to reach out to Xuan on his behalf. Following that meeting, Joe calls his father and asks whether he knows anything about Inspector Ang Tianzu. His father then drops a bombshell. Ang Tianzu is actually about to become Joe's stepbrother. The news hits Joe like a physical blow. His father explains that Tianzu is the son of his future stepmother. Once the wedding happens, Tianzu will officially become Joe's brother. And as if that weren't enough, his father also casually mentions that Joe has a stepsister, a girl named An Jing. Everything slots into place instantly. Joe now understands exactly why An Jing showed up out of nowhere and made a public spectacle of defeating him in front of the entire school. It was almost certainly a deliberate move to damage his reputation. Joe quickly asks his father whether these two siblings actually like their future stepfather. His father claims both of them hold him in high regard. After ending the call, Joe's mind fixates on one question. Why are these siblings so determined to make his life difficult? He wonders whether they oppose their mother's decision to marry his father. Tianzu abused his authority to nearly block Joe from the exam, and Jing showed up and flattened him with a single kick. Both of these things happen purely because Joe is currently too weak to defend himself against people like them. Regardless, he heads back to his messy, stale-smelling apartment and plunges back into the game. Leveling up as fast as possible is the most logical path forward. After defeating a mutated ant, he receives a special drop, a symbiotic egg. Joe's excitement spikes immediately. He knows it's genuinely rare for someone at the mortal level to acquire a symbiotic pet. Most people only gain theirs after reaching legendary tier. The moment his blood avatar reaches for the egg, it begins cracking and slams directly into his chest. A voice suddenly resonates inside his head, pledging absolute loyalty and swearing it would sacrifice its existence for him. An intense pain tears through Joe. He stumbles back onto his bed with his head pounding viciously. But then he notices a brand new tattoo has appeared on his hand. When he checks his phone, he discovers he now possesses a pet, a mutated immense strength ant. This creature can also be deployed in its symbiotic form as a fist weapon, functioning essentially as a combat gauntlet. Thrilled, Joe covers his windows with curtains for privacy and attempts to summon his new companion, though he's not entirely sure how to do it. He focuses intently on his pet. And as his concentration deepens, energy begins gathering above his open hand. A glove-like weapon takes shape. This is the symbiotic form of his ant, and it reportedly amplifies the user's abilities significantly. He then attempts to summon the ant itself. The gauntlet dissolves into mist, and the crimson vapor begins reshaping into the ant's physical body. It materializes into a furious but surprisingly endearing creature. Joe is genuinely a little intimidated seeing it up close. This thing is far larger than he anticipated. He decides writing it as a project for another day, preferably somewhere outdoors. The following morning, the bald teacher drives Joe to meet Xuan. The teacher explains that Xuan is somewhat theatrical in personality, but assures Joe he isn't a bad person at heart. Since their arrangement only covers the duration of the test, there's nothing to genuinely worry about. Their vehicle eventually pulls up to a location called the Honorable Royal Health Club. Inside, a servant meets them at the entrance. The teacher explains they're looking for the second son of the Lee family. The servant quickly escorts them inside. Once inside, it becomes immediately apparent the teacher wasn't exaggerating. The establishment is magnificently opulent, and Xuan himself is surrounded by a cluster of women, radiating the energy of a hip-hop artist who believes he's conquered the world after earning a modest sum. Xuan cheerfully tells the old teacher to sit and have a drink, but the teacher declines and gets straight to business. He introduces Joe immediately, vouching that the kid is highly capable and can easily help Xuan achieve an outstanding score. Xuan waves off the pitch and says he trusts the old teacher. He'll take Joe based on that trust alone. With the arrangement finalized, the teacher announces he's leaving and instructs both of them to get familiar with each other and discuss test logistics. Before departing, he reminds Joe to get comfortable with Xuan and his crew since the exam is right around the corner. Once the teacher is gone, Xuan turns to Joe and says he's heard about him. Apparently the finest talent Goa High School has ever produced. Joe shrugs it off as exaggerated rumor and tells him not to take it seriously. Xuan agrees, then pointedly adds that real geniuses don't emerge from small provinces like theirs. He also reminds Joe that a genuine genius wouldn't have been knocked flat by An Jing in a single move. He then tells Joe to forget about teamwork training sessions entirely. All Joe needs to do is follow orders and stay out of trouble. As a test of character, Xuan offers Joe a challenge. Finish an entire bottle of alcohol in one go and Joe can pick any girl in the club. Joe barely glances up from his phone and flatly states he doesn't drink. This attitude visibly irritates Xuan. He begins privately wondering whether the old teacher's insistence on bringing this indifferent stranger was worth his time. To test Joe's limits, Xuan dispatches one of the girls to entertain him. The girl calls Xuan a mischievous troublemaker and begins hovering around Joe, trying to capture his attention with obvious physical assets. Joe doesn't lift his gaze from his device for even a moment. As she gets increasingly physical and persistent, it becomes clear that Joe is completely absorbed in a particularly challenging battle against a silver-winged mosquito monster inside the game. He's doing everything possible to stay focused, but the woman pushes further and further until she genuinely threatens to cost him the match. Just as his avatar is about to be destroyed, Joe flings her aside like a true Chad and maneuvers his avatar out of danger. Xuan nearly chokes on his drink, completely astounded that Joe physically tossed a woman aside just to preserve his game session. Everyone erupts in laughter at the sheer absurdity of it. Joe looks mildly unhappy about losing ground in the battle, but on the other hand, Xuan seems to be developing a genuine appreciation for this strange person. As night settles in, the room fills up with empty bottles and scattered shot glasses. Xuan appears to have fallen asleep in his bed beside a girl, though on closer inspection his eyes are still open. Joe, meanwhile, remains completely buried in his game, losing repeatedly to the silver-winged mosquito. Throughout the entire night, every single attempt ends in failure. The mosquito hasn't quite reached the legendary tier, so in theory it should be possible to defeat. Joe believes that landing a rank 9 power punch could deal serious damage to it, but that punch takes too long to execute. He wonders if he can somehow blend it with a faster technique. Since his in-game character is a direct reflection of his real-world self, Joe reasons that improving his actual power punch in reality will cause the character's performance to sync up accordingly. He begins physically practicing the punch right there in the room, hoping to translate real improvement into in-game gains. Watching from his bed with half-open eyes, Xuan sneaks a puzzled look at Joe's movements. The entire concept of a 1-inch punch sounds completely nonsensical to him, and he sees nothing particularly impressive in what Joe is doing. He shrugs it off and goes back to sleep. The college entrance examination day finally arrives. Joe dutifully fills out his answer sheet while Xuan sits the exam nearby. When it's over and students pour out of the building, the looks on their faces say everything. It was absolutely brutal. A few days later, a bus packed with students hurtles down the highway toward ancient Gua City. Decades ago, when the dimensional storm struck, a crack opened within the city itself, transforming it into a realm teeming with mutated animals and warped plant life. Military troops are stationed throughout the area and entry requires official authorization. The real combat test is about to commence in this eerie, transformed urban landscape. When the bus stops and students disembark, Joe immediately notices soldiers positioned everywhere, monitoring everything carefully. While waiting for his teammates, he scans the surroundings and spots a large sign reading Gua Province. Right beside it, a small palm-shaped emblem is embedded in the wall, and it immediately draws his attention. His phone suddenly vibrates. He assumes it's his father and reaches for his device, but it's actually the mysterious game phone. This phone has never vibrated, never rung, never received any form of communication before. Even stranger, a camera application has spontaneously activated on its own. Joe opens the app, but doesn't know what to do with it. Thinking maybe he's supposed to take photos, he starts pointing the camera at the scenery. The camera doesn't cooperate, and as he fumbles with it, he accidentally points it at the palm-shaped emblem beside the Gua Province sign. The phone instantly locks onto the emblem, and when he snaps a photo, a brand new application appears on the screen. It appears to be a dungeon entry portal for the game. Since he has free time, Joe decides to experiment with it. After pressing his bloody finger to the screen, his game avatar materializes, and he finds himself navigating through what appears to be a game version of Gua City. Moving forward, he encounters a dimensional creature, an adorably small skeleton soldier. The tiny thing charges at him, wielding an oversized weapon. Joe dodges the skeleton's clumsy attacks with absolute ease. This enemy is neither fast nor strong, considerably simpler than the ants he regularly battles. His avatar balls up its fist and obliterates the skeleton with a devastating punch. A crystal drops immediately, and Joe is pleasantly surprised to find a skill crystal after his very first kill in this zone. He taps the absorb button, and the crystal's energy flows into him, far smoother than his previous absorption experiences. The system announces he's acquired the skeleton palm skill, with a chi consumption of just 1 point. Joe gets off to a promising start, though he doesn't seem particularly enthused. He knows skeleton soldiers are generally low-tier enemies with basic abilities. Still, he decides to keep pushing and test what this new skill is actually capable of. He summons his mutated immense strength ant with a burst of light, climbs onto its back, and the ant charges through the ancient city at impressive speed. Shortly after, he encounters more skeleton zombies and cuts through them effortlessly, treating each one as a training exercise. He's confident every kill will continue producing crystals, and the thrill of the hunt is genuinely enjoyable. After a while, though, Joe's enthusiasm starts draining as he realizes he hasn't obtained anything meaningful despite taking down wave after wave of skeleton soldiers. As he ventures further into the dungeon, something unexpected comes into view: a cluster of smaller skeleton zombies standing guard around what appears to be a final boss. A substantially larger skeleton is seated atop a horse. The skeleton knight wastes absolutely no time. It moves with terrifying speed and lands a hit that pierces straight through Joe's avatar, eliminating him instantly. When the game session ends, Joe stares back at the emblem near the signboard and is now certain that beyond that gateway, Goa Province harbors far more secrets than anyone realizes. Just then, someone materializes behind him. He turns around and finds his stepsister standing there, who as usual looks distinctly unenthused to see him. Shortly after, Joe is seen holding a pen drive, though how he obtained it requires a brief flashback. His stepsister had swung her fist at him, stopping just inches from his face. She informed him their father had asked her to deliver something, then handed over the pen drive. As she left, she muttered about how their father was wasting energy on someone as useless as Joe, declaring he would never truly belong to the Yang family because nobody in her family was as weak and incompetent as him. Joe is quietly puzzled about exactly when he became a member of her family. Lost in thought, he suddenly hears Xuan calling out to him. Turning around, he sees the playboy finally arriving with the other two team members. Xuan is dressed so casually he looks prepared for a beach vacation rather than a military exam. He claps a hand on Joe's shoulder and tells him not to worry, his guys will handle everything. The two lackeys immediately agree, one of them boasting he could single-handedly demolish all of Goa Province for his boss. Xuan doesn't appear particularly impressed by this overconfidence. The other lackey, wearing a black hat, steps forward calmly and promises they'll give their absolute best and nothing will go sideways. Watching this, Joe quickly deduces Xuan's actual plan: keep both himself and Joe out of the fighting while using his two associates as expendable pawns. The test time arrives and a soldier instructs everyone to report to the invigilator. That's when Joe spots Ruoxi in the crowd. He flashes her a warm smile and gives her a thumbs up, visibly easing her anxiety when she sees he's managed to secure a team after all. The city gates begin cracking open, releasing bright blue energy that forms a shimmering portal. A bespectacled man, presumably the invigilator, steps forward and outlines the rules. Points are calculated based on crystals collected by defeating skeleton soldiers, and crystal count determines overall team rankings. He then instructs everyone to step through the gate. Joe strides confidently toward the portal and steps through to the other side alongside the other students. Skeleton monsters immediately begin spawning everywhere, and students throw themselves at the creatures with remarkable enthusiasm. The skeletons clatter forward, bones rattling as they charge. Black Hat takes down a skeleton with a single swing, slicing clean through its neck. The other lackey grabs one by the arm and delivers a devastating knee strike, reducing it to scattered bones. Joe is pleasantly surprised. These two are actually a formidable pair. Their capability gives him the perfect cover to check something on his phone that's been nagging at him. Xuan watches Joe pulling out his phone in total bewilderment, genuinely uncertain whether this person is actually a genius or whether it's all been an elaborate act. Meanwhile, Joe's suspicion has proven completely accurate. The layout of this real city and the dungeon in his game are identical. Not just the city gates, but every building placement matches precisely. This makes him wonder whether every dungeon he encounters is modeled after a real-world location. The moment this realization crystallizes, his expression drains of color. If the real city mirrors the game world, then the Skeleton Knight must exist here in reality as well. Thankfully, based on the territory he explored in the game, there's still a significant distance from the Skeleton Knight zone. As long as they remain within the designated testing area, they should never have to face it. After a while, the group regroups and begins discussing pushing deeper into the city. Joe is clearly reluctant, and they all understand why, even if he can't explain it openly. The lackeys argue that most skeleton soldiers in this section have been cleared, and the respawn rate has dropped significantly. Reaching high scores requires pushing further in. Joe tries to persuade them that venturing beyond the testing boundary is genuinely dangerous. Xuan just shrugs and says if Joe is scared, he's welcome to hang back. The lackeys back Xuan up, insisting deeper exploration is the only real path to top scores. Xuan, then tells Joe to stay with them, promising his guys have Joe's back if things turn ugly. Joe is in an impossible position. He can't reveal that he knows a terrifying boss lurks nearby because he encountered it in a video game, so he tucks his phone away and stays with the group for now, already formulating a plan. He needs to fight the Skeleton Knight again in the game and develop a strategy to actually beat it. That's the only way to ensure both he and Shuan survive whatever's coming. As the two lackeys charge ahead and demolish skeletons with flashy techniques, Joe and Shuan stroll along unhurriedly. The playboy unbothered, Joe completely absorbed in his game. On the screen, his avatar is getting absolutely destroyed by the Skeleton King over and over. After yet another defeat, Joe confronts a harsh reality. Dodging and jumping are both completely useless against this enemy. The knight's sword finds its mark every time, making it more terrifying than even the silver-winged mosquito. But then he observes something important. The Skeleton Knight isn't consistently fast. It only dramatically accelerates during charges. He's fairly certain the creature is using a Chai fighting skill to execute these high-speed bursts. He still hasn't figured out how to neutralize it, and at this rate, a real encounter would annihilate the entire team. Then he notices something. The defeated monster has dropped a substantial dimensional crystal. One of the lackeys snatches it eagerly and rushes to present it to Shuan. The lackey hands it over with excitement, and Joe immediately recommends they've accumulated enough points and should head out now. The lackey disagrees, saying there's still plenty of time before the exam concludes. Black Hat backs him up, arguing they should accumulate extra points to guarantee a top position. Shuan checks his phone and notes that no creatures above legendary level have been detected nearby, so continuing seems safe. But Joe grabs Shuan's arm and asks if he believes in gut instincts. Shuan gives him a confused look. Joe explains that he always experiences a terrible premonition when danger is approaching, and it has never once been wrong. Right now, that overwhelming sense of dread is hitting him harder than ever. Predictably, one of the lackeys refuses to take the warning seriously. He snaps back that Joe should be grateful to even be on this team and shouldn't drag everyone down over some vague premonition. Joe fires back calmly, noting that Goa province is small territory. No students have ever ventured beyond the testing zone before, and they've already accumulated enough points to maintain a clear advantage. There's no rational reason to push into unknown territory. This actually seems to land with Shuan. He concedes Joe makes a fair point. But then, without warning, Black Hat draws a sharp dagger and drives it directly into Shuan's back. After delivering that cowardly blow, the traitor grins like a cat that's just caught something helpless, savoring every bit of the betrayal. The blonde lackey instinctively tries to intervene and protect his master, but Black Hat takes him down too. Standing over his fallen allies, Black Hat tells them with contemptuous calm to just die like dogs. Then Shuan does something that leaves everyone frozen. His wound heals completely. He looks at the traitor with calm eyes and asks whether he was sent by his brother. Black Hat is visibly caught off guard that someone he just stabbed possesses a chase spell called Invincible Constitution. Here's the context for this ability. Chi spells are fundamentally different from Chai fighting skills or dimensional crystals. They're specialized techniques created entirely by humans, each carrying its own cultivation boundaries. Invincible Constitution is among the rarest. It can elevate a practitioner's maximum level straight to the epic tier. The condition? Only those who remain virgins can practice it, and if that condition is ever compromised, the practitioner must start completely from scratch. Joe finds it almost impossible to believe that someone perpetually surrounded by women could possibly be practicing this spell. The fallen lackey on the ground speaks up, expressing his devastation that his so-called friend would collaborate with Shuan's brother against him. Shuan also expresses genuine hurt, saying he never sought to compete with his brother for power and cannot understand why his brother wants him dead. Black Hat shrugs it off with a dismissive comment that Shuan should blame himself for the fate he's earned. With that, he begins channeling energy into his dagger and launches a green energy slash directly at Shuan. The playboy sidesteps it with such fluid, effortless grace that it borders on the supernatural. Then both Joe and the blonde lackey simultaneously notice it. A massive serpent known as the explosive scale snake has materialized. It becomes immediately obvious that Black Hat is no ordinary fighter. Summoning a legendary level creature requires operating at that tier. Shuan, completely unperturbed, explains that legendary level pets can be hatched if someone at that tier is willing to pay a steep price to transfer a creature's symbiotic egg. The trader looks momentarily impressed by how composed and knowledgeable the playboy is, but he quickly refocuses and lunges at Shuan with the dagger. Shuan simply catches the blade with his bare hand. Black Hat's jaw drops. He clearly wasn't prepared for this level of casual supremacy. Xuan's previously serene expression transforms into something distinctly darker and more dangerous. With a simple flick of his wrist, he unleashes a massive energy explosion that sends the traitor skidding across the ground. It's abundantly clear now that Xuan is not merely a charming face, he carries serious power, backed by a legendary-level creature. As Xuan advances, crackling with dark energy and looking like something out of a dark fantasy, the traitor begins retreating rapidly, because his life absolutely depends on it. But Xuan isn't letting him escape. He leaps forward in pursuit. Zhou tries to keep up, but quickly loses them in the distance. The fallen lackey tells Zhou to keep following because Xuan needs every bit of support available. Zhou offers a half-hearted response, and the lackey marches off alone, calling Zhou a coward as he goes. Zhou knows full well that even if he caught up, he wouldn't contribute meaningfully. Both Xuan and the traitor are operating with legendary-level creatures, and he simply isn't there yet. His primary concern right now is the Skeleton Knight. If the chase leads them into its territory, the situation will become catastrophic. The only way he can actually help Xuan is by working out how to defeat the Skeleton Knight before any real confrontation occurs. So he presses his thumb, draws blood onto the screen, and his avatar re-enters the dungeon. He is absolutely determined to face the knight and develop a working strategy. The Skeleton Knight immediately begins charging on its horse. Zhou realizes that retreating is pointless once the charge initiates. The attack becomes nearly impossible to dodge. So instead of backing away, he leaps directly toward the knight, catching the brainless creature completely off guard. The knight grows furious and starts wildly swinging its spear in every direction, trying to connect. Zhou refuses to stand still. He keeps circling the mounted knight continuously, denying it a clean opportunity to strike. As the exchange intensifies, Zhou keeps weaving left and right. Then the Skeleton Knight deploys its trump card, landing a direct hit square into the avatar's chest. Zhou had been momentarily distracted by nearby commotion and suspects Xuan has now encountered the real Skeleton King. He pockets his phone and recalls everything he learned from the previous encounter. He remembers the Skeleton Knight is powerful, but has a critical blind spot near its horse. Exploiting that weakness provides a genuine survival window. Moving through the area, Zhou spots debris and rubble, clear evidence the fighters came through here. He follows the trail and finally catches up with them. He asks if everyone is alright. Xuan responds that alright would be a significant exaggeration. Zhou is genuinely terrified when he sees the Skeleton Knight standing before him in reality. It's dramatically more intimidating than anything the game prepared him for. He also notices that Black Hat is positioned directly behind the Skeleton Knight, and the creature is ignoring him entirely. Then Zhou spots the armor Black Hat is wearing, which must contain some kind of dimensional repelling property that causes the Skeleton Knight to treat him as neutral. Incidentally, this Black Hat traitor's name is Manhwa, and Zhou finds it deeply troubling that Xuan's brother must be extraordinarily wealthy to equip someone with this many legendary-level resources. The knight rapidly identifies Zhou's party as threats and begins charging at them on horseback. Xuan immediately tells everyone to stand back and raises his shield just before the skeleton strikes. The clash between their forces generates a powerful explosion, and the resulting shockwave is so intense that the lackey standing near Zhou gets launched through the air, hitting the floor hard. He coughs violently, but insists he's fine. As the dust settles, both the Skeleton King and Xuan are locked in a deadlock. That's when Xuan spots a sneak attack incoming, the explosive snake belonging to Manhwa. Xuan rapidly raises his shield and blocks the serpent completely. Manhwa retracts the snake and begins grinning maniacally, delighted at the prospect of forcing Xuan to manage two simultaneous threats. While the Skeleton Knight continues hammering Xuan, Manhwa charges in as well, making the situation dramatically worse. Xuan's armor is beginning to show fractures under the sustained assault, and he's clearly struggling to handle both opponents at once. Zhou asks Xuan directly, how long would it take to neutralize Manhwa if Zhou kept the Skeleton King occupied in the meantime? Xuan, with complete self-assurance, says no more than 2 minutes. The fallen lackey privately scoffs. Zhou is mortal level. There's no way he survives even one exchange with the Skeleton Knight. Challenging it is essentially a death sentence. But Zhou makes a dramatic show of removing his coat, settles into a firm stance, and leaps directly behind the Skeleton King, casually goading it into facing him. The brainless creature falls for it immediately and turns to confront Zhou. Without hesitation, the knight lunges, but Zhou sidesteps the first attack. He notices the movement pattern shares similarities with what he fought in the game, but this real-world version is noticeably more agile during its attacks. The exchange continues, the knight constantly trying to tag him, Joe constantly slipping just beyond reach. He then balls up his fists and drives a solid punch directly into the horse's ribs. The result is about as effective as flicking an elephant. The Skeleton King seems almost entertained, toying with this seemingly insignificant challenger. Meanwhile, the fallen lackey is back on his feet and deeply humbled, because Joe has been keeping the Skeleton Knight occupied without any symbiotic pet at all. Even Zhenghua is visibly baffled at how easily Joe matches pace with this monster. Then Xuan delivers a devastating punch directly to the traitor's face, launching him like a ragdoll. Zhenghua manages to regain his footing and plants himself stubbornly, making clear he won't yield unless one of them is dead or incapacitated. The exchange between them resumes, and Xuan is managing reasonably well. It seems Zhenghua is finally being overwhelmed. Xuan's last strike leaves the traitor coughing up blood and his symbiotic pet begins to shatter. But this stubborn traitor refuses to stay down. He hauls himself back to his knees and deploys his second snake pet to distract Xuan once more. With the playboy occupied, Zhenghua attempts to ambush Joe from behind. Simultaneously, the Skeleton Knight swings at Joe. Joe drops instantly, letting both attacks pass harmlessly overhead. He then balls up his fist and destroys Black Hat's symbiotic pet with a single powerful punch, channeling his own symbiotic ant as a gauntlet. The instant Black Hat loses his pet, the Skeleton Knight drives its spear directly through the traitor's chest. The snake begins shrieking in anguish, reduced from a fearsome creature to something resembling a small gecko. Xuan steps forward and crushes it underfoot, ending it permanently. With that threat eliminated, the Skeleton King begins transforming, finally unleashing its complete power. The monster's aura becomes genuinely menacing, and it immediately launches a devastating attack directly at Joe. The speed is so extreme that Joe has no time to evade. He braces himself to absorb it head-on, but Xuan throws himself into the path of the strike, deflecting it at tremendous personal cost. The sheer power of the blow shatters Xuan's armor like glass. Witnessing this, Joe feels a spike of genuine alarm. Even Xuan is being pushed to the absolute edge. The Skeleton King prepares another assault and both of them break into a run. Then Xuan articulates a plan. Joe delivers the killing blow while Xuan draws the Skeleton King's full attention. The moment the Skeleton King attacks, Xuan intercepts it completely. Joe finds the opening, materializes directly behind the skeleton, and unleashes a devastating punch that sets the creature ablaze and sends shockwaves rippling through the surrounding area. As the dust settles, the Skeleton Knight stands just as menacingly as before. Didn't even flinch. Joe leaps clear of the follow-up strike, and Xuan blocks again. Joe then launches a rapid-fire sequence of flaming punches, each one building into a massive combined explosion upon impact. The knight's audience is absolutely staggered, but as the haze clears, the creature is visibly furious. And Joe notices something new, a crack forming across the skeleton's skull. Xuan immediately understands what needs to happen. He launches Joe skyward while simultaneously planting a devastating punch squarely in front of the Skeleton King. With the knight's attention completely absorbed by Xuan, it looks upward, and the last thing it registers is Joe plummeting straight down toward it. The Skeleton King attempts to raise its sword. Xuan pushes to the very limit of his strength, pinning the blade to the ground. With the knight completely defenseless, Joe crashes down and drives a devastating punch directly into the top of its skull. The punch is so powerful that the skull finally shatters in a massive explosion. Joe flashes a deeply satisfied grin as the Skeleton King crumbles into rubble, leaving behind a single drop. Joe immediately crouches to claim the crystal, but it isn't a crystal at all. It's a symbiotic egg. Even better, Xuan simply turns and begins walking away as his armor dissolves. He tells Joe to keep the egg as a gift in appreciation for his efforts, but he also warns Joe that his current level is dangerously low for safely hatching a legendary level creature. He advises against attempting it carelessly. Joe nods in understanding. Then Xuan notices the gauntlet on Joe's hand and asks how he acquired a symbiotic pet. He's suspicious because normally only someone with invincible constitution could handle a legendary level creature. He wonders whether Joe might secretly be at legendary level. Joe quickly clarifies that he's just mortal level. This revelation only shocks Xuan further, because mortal level symbiotic eggs are apparently rarer than legendary ones, making Joe's pet significantly more unusual and considerably more enviable. Joe asks with some concern whether anyone witnessed what happened to Black Hat. Xuan shrugs it off, says the guy brought it on himself, and promises to handle the aftermath. He gives Joe a reassuring pat on the shoulder and tells him to relax. He also guarantees that once they leave, Joe can apply to whatever college he wants, and Xuan will personally ensure it happens. The two walk back through the portal with their injured companion. Xuan fills in the invigilator on what transpired inside. Once everything is sorted, Xuan departs in his private vehicle, and Joe waves a final goodbye before boarding the bus back to the city. When the bus arrives, Joe steps off feeling genuinely cold and slightly depleted, likely from excessive blood loss during his gaming sessions. He decides to get some iron-rich food to help his body recover. Walking down the street, his foot accidentally connects with something on the ground, a person smeared in blood. Startled, he initially assumes he's found a corpse, but the figure quickly sits upright and assures Joe that he is very much alive, just dealing with persistent pain. Joe starts to walk away, but the disheveled-looking old man invites him to stay for a brief conversation since their paths happen to cross. Joe isn't naturally talkative, but the old man insists on asking a few questions. Even though Joe has no idea what they're about to discuss, he agrees to stay. The conversation takes an immediately baffling turn when the old man asks Joe whether he prefers women with large breasts. Joe is completely caught off guard. After a moment of internal deliberation, imagining both types, he determines he actually prefers the smaller variety. The old man bursts out laughing and enthusiastically agrees, launching into an explanation of why his preference reflects superior judgment. Joe finds himself awkwardly imagining how a woman with substantial assets would struggle to manage them effectively during combat, especially if physics were exaggerated. The perverted old man then poses another completely unexpected question. Does Joe prefer gentle and sweet-natured women, or fiery and sharp-tongued ones? Joe, who wants nothing more than to go home, decides to say the most obviously wrong-sounding answer just to conclude the conversation. He reluctantly says he prefers fiery and sharp-tongued. The old man goes quiet for a moment, then his eyes light up with genuine admiration and complete agreement. He declares that spirited women are far more interesting and that gentle personalities simply aren't much fun. He also remarks that he didn't expect someone so young to possess such refined taste in people. Joe immediately thinks of his stepsister who kicked him around without a second thought, and he genuinely cannot understand why anyone would actively seek that kind of person out. The old man, beaming happily, states that it's refreshing to find someone with such aligned sensibilities. Joe offers to walk the old man home. The pervert ignores the question entirely and instead points out that Joe looks quite low on energy, and no amount of good taste in women will matter if his health is failing. The old man then produces a small notebook and presents it to Joe, claiming it contains a chase spell worth practicing. Joe is taken aback. The old man elaborates that this spell will make any woman cooperative regardless of how difficult her disposition might be, so Joe had better master it fully. Joe politely declines, explaining he's already committed to other chi spells and doesn't need this one. The old man waves the objection aside and points out that while this true demonic record isn't the absolute pinnacle of chi spells, it is considerably more potent than bitter meditation. Joe freezes. The old man knows he practices bitter meditation. He cautiously asks how this complete stranger could possibly know that. The old man explains that despite Joe appearing pale right now, his physique, solid, taut, disciplined, could only be built through bitter meditation. He adds that it's clear Joe hasn't been at it long and advises him to stop before he damages himself. He insists Joe adopt the true demonic record instead, initially claiming it's 100 times better, then enthusiastically correcting himself to 1,000 times better. Cackling to himself, Joe genuinely has no idea what to make of any of this. He politely thanks the old man, but says he can't accept a valuable gift from a complete stranger. Internally, he's also reluctant because he's never heard of a Che fighting skill called True Demonic Record, and he doesn't want to get ensnared in some scheme by this ragged stranger. He begins walking away. The old man falls quiet. Then, in a tone laced with quiet menace, he tells Joe to stop. At that single command, Joe's next step falters. He finds himself completely incapable of moving forward and is physically pulled back to his original position by an invisible force. The old man introduces himself as Jin Daoxin. The name detonates inside Joe's memory immediately. His eyes go wide. Jin Daoxin is a name that appears in the history books. Worn during the most catastrophic era of dimensional storms, he is remembered as the single most ruthless and terrifying person in all of human history. The devil who drowned the Federation in blood. The man who eliminated 27 epic-level individuals one after another. The old man calmly asks Joe whether he's reconsidered accepting the true demonic record, or whether he still intends to refuse. Joe immediately says he will absolutely take it. The old man finds it suspicious that he agreed so quickly and asks whether Joe is genuinely interested or simply bluffing. Joe doesn't say it aloud, but internally he has absolutely zero intention of practicing anything this man gives him. He knows full well that doing so would put him on every wanted list in the Federation overnight. Jin then reconsiders. He decides not to hand over the true demonic record after all, correctly inferring that Joe wouldn't practice it regardless. He rummages through his coat again and produces a different, shorter notebook. He asks Joe whether he'd like to try this one instead. Joe stares at the notebook cautiously, but doesn't protest this time. Jin Deoxin then forcibly presses the notebook into Joe's hands and warns him in no uncertain terms not to refuse this time, or the consequences will be severe. With that, the ancient legend vanishes into the bustling street, leaving Joe standing alone with an armload of unanswered questions and a notebook he never asked for. Standing there in the street, Joe wonders if he's still being observed. He stares down at the notebook and genuinely cannot figure out how he ended up accepting it. Just then, he sneezes and breaks into a run toward home. As he walks, he spots a cluster of officers in conversation nearby. One asks if the reaction was detected in this area. A red-haired woman confirms it was. The officer instructs her to search the vicinity and maintain contact. Joe notices their badges. These are Federation personnel. He suspects they might be tracking Jin Deoxin, whom he just crossed paths with moments ago. But he keeps walking, telling himself this has nothing to do with him. Back home, Joe draws himself a bath immediately. As he soaks, he reflects on how genuinely bizarre the day has been. First, Xuan was ambushed by one of his own teammates. Then, on the way home, Joe randomly stumbled into what is arguably the most feared man in recorded human history. All he originally wanted was to get cozy in his room and game in peace. He looks down at the chi spell notes Jin gave him and wonders if they'll be of any use whatsoever. Eventually, he collapses into bed for a desperately needed sleep. Just as his mind drifts toward unconsciousness, a nightmare grips him. Monsters are converging on him from every direction simultaneously. The dream is so vivid and overwhelming that he jolts awake drenched in sweat. He staggers to the bathroom and vomits violently into the toilet, head spinning from intense pain. He has absolutely no idea what's happening to him. His eyes land on the chi spell notes sitting on the table. He notices words flashing on the page. The text reads, "Lost Immortal Sutra." He grabs the notebook and examines it from every angle, but finds nothing unusual in the physical pages. He wonders if he's simply too anemic to think clearly. As sunrise marks the beginning of a new day, he splashes water on his face and studies himself in the mirror. He feels genuinely more refreshed and clear-headed. He decides to open the morning with a gaming session. He pricks his finger, presses blood onto the screen, and his avatar loads immediately. Inside the game, he's surprised to discover the Skeleton Knight is still present, which means the game world and real world operate completely independently of each other. Monsters he defeats in one don't affect the other. This is actually welcome news, since it gives him another opportunity to practice against the boss. The monster charges at him immediately. Once again, he gets defeated. After hours of consecutive attempts, he's completely exhausted. The boss is noticeably weaker than its real-life counterpart, but without Xuan's support, he's struggling to find a consistent method to overcome it. Perfecting his positioning will take days, and he's uncertain how much blood he'll drain throughout the process. Wanting to understand the blood loss issue better, he researches it online, but the sheer volume of available information overwhelms him. In typical fashion, he opts for the simplest solution, snack on some nuts for a quick energy boost, and simply try to avoid dying as much as possible. He heads to a nearby grocery store to pick up supplies before resuming his grinding sessions. Back home, he sits back down to play, stacking cans of food beside him as fuel. The healthy options he selected at the store appear to have been anything but. After countless attempts, he finally begins reading the Skeleton Knight's patterns with accuracy. He identifies an opening while airborne and shatters the monster's skull. This kill drops a level 13 dimensional crystal that boosts speed. Joe claims his reward proudly, but when he checks his stats, his speed attribute only climbs a few points, bringing it up to 9. He expected it to jump all the way to 13, but it appears he's hit the ceiling for his current cultivation level. He mulls over whether to pursue bitter meditation to break through into the legendary level. But as Jin Deoxin pointed out, bitter meditation is nothing compared to invincible constitution. Joe is desperately eager to learn a higher level chi technique and wonders whether he should finally try the notebook Jin gave him. Then something entirely different clicks in his mind. He jumps into his chair, fires up his computer, and plugs in the pen drive his stepsister delivered. He reasons there might be a chai spell on it, though he dismisses the thought as unlikely. But when the system reads the drive, his jaw literally drops. There is a spell on it. It's called sun shooting. He pinches himself to confirm he isn't dreaming. Both the sun shooting spell and invincible constitution can carry a practitioner beyond the legendary level, and both are primarily offensive-focused techniques. Sun shooting is somewhat less demanding than invincible constitution. It also appears to be a family chai spell connected to someone prominent within the Federation. He has no idea how his father came to possess something this extraordinary. He wonders whether it was acquired through the Aang family's connections at significant personal cost, though he quickly dismisses that thought, telling himself his father isn't the type to go to those lengths for anyone. Just then, his father's phone rings. Joe is calling him. His father wonders why his son would reach out at this hour, and when he answers, Joe completely throws him off by asking whether he's still in one piece. The father pauses in confusion, then snaps back, telling Joe to knock on wood and calling him a rotten brat. At least that confirms the old man is alive and well. Joe gets serious and asks where his father obtained the sun shooting spell. A prolonged silence follows. The father then asks which sun shooting spell he's referring to. Joe is stunned. He asks again whether his father didn't instruct Jing to deliver it. The man responds flatly that he has zero interest in cultivation and no logical reason to acquire something of that nature. Joe is genuinely disappointed to learn his father never thought of him in that way. But now he's more confused than ever. If his father didn't arrange it, why did Jing claim it came from her father? His father suggests it might have been Jing's own personal gift to Joe. Joe acknowledges this and abruptly ends the call, which clearly irritates the older man. But his father settles down and resolves to investigate who actually gave his son something so valuable. Back with Joe, he reflects on how the Aang family keeps demonstrating an unusual degree of interest in his father and his life. The conflicting signals don't add up, and Jing challenged him publicly. Tianzua used his authority to nearly derail his exam participation, and now, out of nowhere, Jing has gifted him an extraordinary chai fighting technique. None of it fits together coherently. He decides to stop overthinking it and simply focus on training. As he starts drifting off to sleep, his heart races and unease seizes him again. The same demonic hands reach for him in the darkness. When they close around his throat, panic jolts him awake, completely drenched in sweat. 2 consecutive nightmares of the same nature. He's now convinced Jin de Oxen is somehow connected to this. He splashes water on his face and the old man's parting words flash back to him. He glances at the small notebook and wonders if it contains the answer to these disturbing dreams. He sits down and spends several hours carefully working through the unusual notes, gradually beginning to grasp the relationship between Shi and the human magnetic field. But just as real understanding starts forming, his stomach growls ferociously. He forgot to eat entirely. He stands up, heats a bowl of instant food, and returns to the notes. After eating, he loses his place entirely and has to restart from the beginning. Just as he reaches the section connecting chi spells to the human magnetic field again, his mind spontaneously wanders. Did he actually turn off the kitchen lights? He agonizes over this question until frustration forces him back to reading, only to realize he's completely forgotten everything he just processed. He takes a deliberate breath, forces himself into total concentration, and extracts every piece of information from the notes. But every time a distraction interrupts him, everything he memorized vanishes without a trace. This is the strangest thing he's ever experienced. No matter the effort he puts in, the content simply refuses to stick. He decides to try copying the notes into a separate notebook. The moment pen touches paper, his memory goes blank. He attempts to photograph the pages. The camera captures nothing. The text simply doesn't appear in any photo. He finds this deeply disturbing and wonders if putting the notebook down entirely will somehow restore things to normal. Just then his phone rings. An unfamiliar number. It's Shuan calling from a different line, asking whether Joe has decided which university he's attending. Joe suddenly realizes he's been so absorbed in gaming that he completely forgot exam results were being announced today. Shuan then asks whether Joe wants to attend the same university as him. He reveals the rankings. Shuan placed first, Joe placed second. With that established, the playboy announces with full confidence that they're heading to Sunset College. This immediately rings a bell for Joe. Sunset College recently discovered a new dimensional realm and a new symbiotic pet, making it an extraordinarily desirable destination. But then the anxiety kicks in. Sunset College falls within the Aang family's territory, which almost certainly means his step-siblings will be there. Regardless, he dives back into a gaming session. He's up against the silver-winged mosquito again. He concentrates fire into his fist and hurls it at the creature, but the mosquito evades effortlessly and slices his avatar in half. His frustration is genuine. Even after defeating the Skeleton King, this tiny, irritating creature continues to make a fool of him. Its speed combined with its ability to fly makes it almost untouchable. A sudden knock at the door cuts through his thoughts. He opens it to find Xuan standing outside, already walking inside before Joe can even say anything. After Joe asks what's going on, Xuan tosses him a book and tells him to examine it carefully. Joe flips through the pages and asks what it is. Xuan reveals it's a classified document from Sunset College, then points to an illustrated entry and explains it depicts a creature in its visceral form, and this type of creature recently appeared in the dimensional realm that Sunset College discovered. Joe finds Xuan's excessive enthusiasm a bit unsettling and asks what the big deal is. Xuan, looking genuinely deflated by this reaction, snaps slightly and explains that if Joe were to lose his heart in battle, this creature could replace it instantaneously, effectively granting him a second chance at life. Even after hearing this, Joe seems underwhelmed, which absolutely infuriates Xuan. Joe actually understands the significance, he just doesn't appreciate being surprised with information rather than consulted. Xuan adds that since this dimensional realm falls under Sunset College's jurisdiction, only enrolled students can access it. He notes that if this information became public knowledge, top students from everywhere would flood the applications, but available slots are extremely limited. That finally captures Joe's genuine attention. He quickly agrees to enroll at Sunset College. Xuan then casually mentions that the Aang family will reportedly also be attending Sunset College. Joe's expression shifts to something uneasy. Xuan, surprised by this reaction, asks why Joe looks so apprehensive. Joe shrugs it off and says he's not apprehensive at all. He confirms he's registering today. Xuan tells him to pack his belongings because they're heading to Luoyang in his Lamborghini. A short while later, the scene shifts to what appears to be a federal investigation headquarters. Two officers are still actively hunting Jin Deoxin. Reviewing security footage from Chang'an Road, they spot Joe in recording and begin speculating that he might have some connection to Jin Deoxin. Meanwhile, out on a storm-darkened highway, Joe and Xuan are tearing down the road in the Lamborghini. Joe is enjoying the ride, but privately worrying about how long this journey will take, given that they need to avoid all zones near dimensional realms. He also reflects on how dramatically the game's difficulty has spiked, nearly doubled, and whether playing at this intensity is just hemorrhaging blood needlessly. He glances over at Xuan, who's lounging in the passenger seat looking drowsy. Joe starts nodding off himself but snaps awake. Falling asleep in the car and going into sleep paralysis would leave him completely vulnerable. He's also not sure why he's feeling feverish and dizzy. Then he recalls what Jin Deoxin told him about the importance of maintaining good health if he wants to be worth anything at all. With that firmly in mind, Joe resolves to game in moderation going forward to protect his health. A thoroughly admirable resolution, exactly the kind people make every single day before immediately breaking it. Joe starts feeling increasingly anxious just thinking about Jin Deoxin. He seriously contemplates confronting that old man the moment he becomes strong enough. Ever since their encounter, he's been feeling consistently worse. He's determined that revenge will eventually be satisfying. Then something stirs inside him. He reaches into his pocket and withdraws the notebook Jin gave him. The name on the cover begins glowing faintly with energy. Before opening it, he checks. Xuan is deep in meditation and won't notice. Since he's bored, reading the notes seems like a reasonable way to pass the time. The moment he cracks the notebook open, words begin rising off the pages and yellow energy starts swirling at the center of his chest. A while later, the notes have completely vanished. Joe opens his eyes and stares at his empty hand, genuinely bewildered. He wonders if he fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. He closes his eyes again and suddenly finds himself standing in the middle of an enchantment circle. He jolts awake once more. It appears that finishing the Lost Immortal Sutra has cultivated all that energy within him. When he checks his system stats, his chase spell has changed. It now displays Lost Immortal Sutra where his previous techniques were listed. He concentrates, and a flash of light sparks in his palm. He realizes bitter meditation is no longer accessible to him. The panel has completely transitioned to the new system. Notably, the power system in this story feels genuinely underexplored in fascinating ways. Joe also notices something significant. He has broken through the 9-point attribute ceiling that defines the mortal stage. Feeling genuinely pleased about growing stronger, Joe finds himself actually grateful he crossed paths with that strange old man. Once they finally pull up to a sprawling mansion, Xuan tells Joe to leave all the Sunset College enrollment arrangements to him and suggests Joe simply stay there until classes begin. In the living room, Xuan brings out drinks. Joe asks whether Xuan lives here alone without any staff, and Xuan confirms it. He then offers Joe a bizarre hybrid can of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. As they drink, Xuan's phone rings. After a brief conversation, he hangs up and tells Joe to rest while he heads out for some business. Once alone, Joe wanders the mansion, sheds his coat, and begins throwing punches. He reflects on how a power punch requires a wide, sweeping motion, which makes it completely incompatible with the precision required for a 1-inch punch technique. He recalls trying to combine both against the silver-winged mosquito and how easily the creature evaded it. He needs an entirely different approach for that fight. Then he remembers the skeleton palm skill he picked up. He glances at his hand, still trailing faint smoke, and considers that its rank is quite low, probably won't be impressive enough on its own. But he starts training with it anyway, and the moment he swings his hand, a gust of wind blades tears through the surrounding air. He's genuinely impressed. This technique is fast enough to potentially pair well with the 1-inch punch concept, so he keeps training relentlessly until exhaustion forces him to stop. He notes that despite being a rank 1 Chai fighting skill, Skeleton Palm burns through chi at a surprisingly steep rate. Deciding to test it in the game, he presses blood onto the screen, and his avatar loads immediately. Hilariously, the avatar materializes directly on top of a mutated ant, which is predictably furious about the intrusion. The ant immediately swings at him. Joe's chi bar is already significantly depleted from real-world training, making this more challenging than usual. But he manages to dodge the strike, and the Lost Immortal Sutra kicks in, helping his chi recover, and, as a bonus, it also increases his movement speed. He then deploys his combined technique, the 1-inch skeleton palm, striking the ant directly and producing a massive explosion that finishes the creature. A system window immediately appears with an achievement notification. Skeleton Palm has leveled all the way to level 10 and has evolved into Ash Palm. Joe is genuinely thrilled. He checks the upgraded skill. It now consumes 5 points of chi, putting it roughly in the same power tier as his power punch. Eager to test the new abilities, he loads the skeleton dungeon, only to remember that since he already defeated the skeleton knight, he needs to die and respawn to face it again. He grudgingly lets the small skeleton soldiers take him out. After extensive practice with his new techniques, he finally cracks the pattern. By using his enhanced speed to circle behind the skeleton knight and striking from the rear with Ash Palm, a single hit completely shatters the knight's skull. A while later, a woman enters the mansion. Spotting Joe lying around, she calls out with a firm, authoritative voice that snaps him awake. He sits up startled and asks who she is. She demands to know why he's alone here and where Xuan is. He explains that Xuan is out, which prompts her to assume Xuan has been spending time with questionable people or women again. She mutters a frustrated curse at him for always being impossible to reach. With that peculiar remark, she turns to leave, but then stops, grabs Joe by the hand without any prior consent, and declares that he'll serve as a stand-in. She begins pulling him along before he can even object. As she glances back at him, she explains that she's Xuan's older sister. Since Joe is her brother's friend, she wants to ask him for a favor. Joe inwardly acknowledges that given everything he and Xuan have been through together, the playboy has genuinely become something like a real friend. But he'd strongly prefer to avoid trouble and simply enjoy solo gaming time. He mutters something about this to himself, and the girl asks what he said. He waves it off quickly. She instructs him to clean up and dress properly. A short while later, they arrive at Sunset College's pet arena. The place is brilliantly lit, bathed in neon light, almost like entering an entirely different world. They dismount from a heavy motorcycle and are met by 2 women already waiting. The sister immediately tells Joe he doesn't need to do anything, just stand aside and cheer for her. Joe happily agrees and immediately pulls out his phone to game. This visibly irritates her. As the crowd begins gathering, someone expresses surprise at seeing Xuan's sister arrive. Another person jokes that maybe Xuan was too intimidated to show up himself. The sister cuts that down immediately, declaring she's perfectly capable of handling everything on her own. She then faces a woman named Sue and directly confronts her. They jointly defeated a mutated ancient warhorse together, so why is Sue claiming sole ownership of the symbiotic egg? Sue immediately performs theatrical fright, hiding behind her boyfriend and insisting she delivered the fatal blow, and therefore the egg belongs to her. Her boyfriend steps in, reminding everyone that the agreement was to settle it through combat. Whoever wins takes the egg, so there's no point in assigning blame beforehand. The sister addresses someone called Gang and suggests he simply hand over the egg without forcing a fight, given that everyone already knows how this ends. Gang's arrogance, however, is on an entirely different level. He labels her as his junior and declares it wouldn't be a fair match if he faced her directly, too much of an advantage on his side. With a smug grin, he announces he has someone else who will handle her for him. Then footsteps echo through the arena. The sister's confidence wavers as she looks toward the sound. A figure steps out from the shadows, a sophomore named Gan, radiating such raw, intense energy that even the sister, who was moments ago brimming with confidence, begins to feel genuine unease. Joe, watching from the sidelines, can physically sense the vicious aura emanating from this newcomer. Everyone around them is visibly trembling. The two contenders face off. Gan taunts the sister and tells her to come at him. She responds by radiating her own intense aura, ready to engage alone. One of her friends urgently advises her to surrender the egg. This isn't a fight worth having. Joe curiously asks who Gan actually is. The terrified girl explains that he's known throughout the school as the Devil. Rumor has it he beat up a senior student on his very first day of enrollment. With his curiosity fully engaged, Joe starts wondering whether Gan truly lives up to the frightening reputation everyone attributes to him. Just as they're about to clash, Gong throws in a provocative taunt asking whether she's really scared of someone like Gan. That completely finishes the provocation. She sweeps her leg in a powerful kick aimed at Gan's head. He simply tilts his head slightly and absorbs it on his shoulder without reacting. It accomplishes nothing. She leaps into the air and tries again with another brutal overhead kick directed at his skull. Gan just stands there, completely unbothered, like he's barely registered the contact at all. As her leg comes crashing down, he catches it effortlessly with one hand and slams her into the ground with such force that a cloud of dust and smoke erupts from the impact. When the haze dissipates, she's been driven into the floor with devastating force. He steps toward her and makes it abundantly clear she's no match for him. And he's right. Her forehead is bleeding and her body is thoroughly battered. And then this absolute jerk kicks her again, sending her tumbling. He mockingly asks whether she wants to continue. Her friends immediately urge her to give up the egg and concede. The blonde woman on Gong's side launches verbal attacks at the sister, telling her even her own friends have surrendered, so she might as well accept defeat graciously. Bleeding and trembling, the sister attempts to get back to her feet. She opens her mouth to speak. Gan reaches out, seizes her by the throat, and slams her back into the ground, treating her like a discarded mud doll. The shockwave ripples through the arena. Gan straightens up, thoroughly enjoying his moment of absolute dominance. But then, his eyes widen in genuine surprise. The sister begins rising again. Battered, bleeding, barely able to stand, she declares she isn't finished yet. Hearing her unwavering refusal to yield, Gan's expression turns completely serious. His bloodshot eyes lock onto her, and he balls his fist, charging directly at her. But before his punch can land, Joe comes charging in from the side. Their fists collide. A shockwave of force erupts between them. Gan stares at this newcomer with real intrigue, genuinely surprised that someone just casually blocked his attack. He asks Joe who he is. Joe introduces himself simply, mentioning he's recently been admitted to Sunset College. Gan notes that even though they'll be schoolmates soon, he isn't about to hold back if Joe is planning to play hero. The sister warns Joe urgently that this is dangerous and he shouldn't have involved himself. But before she finishes the sentence, Joe grabs her and hoists her over his shoulder like she's a toddler, telling her she's the one who needs to rest and recover. Before she can protest meaningfully, he carries her back to her friends. The other women exhale collective sighs of relief. The sister, still being carried, isn't entirely sure what to make of this person or how he plans to handle someone like Gan. When Joe finally turns to face Gan directly, he attempts to appeal to reason, suggesting that fighting to mutual destruction isn't the most productive resolution. Gan, visibly unimpressed, asks if Joe has a better proposal. Joe offers a clean settlement. Gan takes one punch. If he moves fewer than 3 steps backward from the impact, Joe admits defeat and leaves. Gan is annoyed by what he perceives as a completely pointless exercise. He channels a menacing aura and tells Joe to stop wasting his time and simply do it. Joe calmly warns him that his punch carries considerable force. He might want to keep his teeth intact. Gong, watching from the sidelines, starts looking genuinely concerned. If Gan takes 3 or more steps back, this could go very wrong very fast. His girlfriend rushes to reassure him. She explains that Gan's chai fighting skill is the porcupine armor, forged from needle porcupine crystals. Not only does it render his body as hard as steel, but it also delivers a brutal counterattack to anyone who strikes it. and since his porcupine armor has reached the 9th rank, the last person who challenged him this way ended up losing an arm. In short, Joe's plan might be dangerously naive, but Joe is already in motion. He balls up his fists, and as momentum builds, the half-gauntlet on his hand begins dissolving. His punch lands squarely in the bald man's gut, and his expression tightens as the force compounds and builds, ultimately triggering a massive explosion that sends the bald man sliding backward far beyond his original position. Wang is absolutely blown away by what she just witnessed. Clearly, the bald man has lost decisively, and that last punch was brutal enough that Joe's own fist is smeared with his blood. That's when the blonde woman starts shouting, struggling to accept defeat. She argues that Joe isn't actually part of Wang's party, so even if he won, the victory shouldn't count. Her dignified boyfriend delivers a sharp slap across her face for her whining after a completely fair loss and firmly states that they've lost, and he's a man of his word. He acknowledges Joe with a calm remark that they'll meet again, and he looks forward to that day. With that, the three of them depart. The surrounding women immediately swarm Joe with praise and flattery, showering him in well-earned admiration. They remark on how impressively powerful their junior is and seem genuinely captivated. That's when Wang calls out to Joe and points to his hand. He waves it off, saying it's just a minor injury and the bleeding will stop on its own. He then reminds her with genuine concern that her own injuries are far more serious and she should head to the infirmary immediately. The girl agrees, and Joe, in his completely characteristic fashion, hoists her over his shoulder like a plush toy. She seems genuinely moved that her brother has a friend like Joe. Shortly after, they return to the mansion. Joe is visibly annoyed to realize just how long it's been since he last played his game. He's finally ready to dive back into it, or so he thinks. Just as Joe is about to start gaming, Xuan makes a dramatic entrance, and by now Joe is thoroughly convinced the entire universe is conspiring to deny him his favorite hobby. Xuan walks over, gives him a pat, and asks whether Joe still remembers the dimensional realm he mentioned, the one where a creature in its visceral form was discovered. He's bringing it up because he apparently wants to take Joe there for a visit. Joe finds this odd and points out they shouldn't even have access to the realm before school has officially started. Xuan smirks and confidently assures him that arranging access is trivially easy for someone like him. But Joe is more interested in checking his stats than listening to Xuan's pitch. Xuan gets increasingly irritated as Joe keeps pretending to listen. He finally begins walking away and warns Joe to sleep early because they're leaving first thing in the morning. Joe agrees absently, still staring at his screen. He eventually calls out to Xuan. When Xuan turns around, Joe asks what's actually required to hatch a legendary level symbiotic egg. Xuan is mildly surprised by this sudden question and asks if Joe is referring to the legendary level Skeleton Knight. He advises against anything foolish, explaining that hatching a legendary level creature requires at least a dozen chi points at minimum. If the hatcher lacks sufficient chi, their vitality and flesh are consumed instead, potentially resulting in severe injury or permanent disability. To Joe, this sounds like there might still be a window of opportunity, so he asks if any exceptions to this rule exist. Xuan proudly explains that he himself is one such exception. His invincible constitution makes him considerably more resilient, compensating for vitality loss and allowing him to hatch certain legendary level creatures even at a lower level. However, he warns that even for him, hatching a legendary level creature pushes his chi beyond sustainable limits. He advises Joe to abandon the idea unless he's prepared to genuinely risk death. Back in his bedroom, Joe reflects on how death inside the game doesn't frighten him, but handling the symbiotic egg in real life changes the equation significantly. Then an idea strikes him. Since the phone unlocks dungeons based on real-world locations, he quickly photographs the egg. The egg begins dissolving from his hands as the system announces it's been stored. Now it's accessible from within the game, and he finally has the option to either hatch it or accept a fusion. Unsure what accept a fusion means, he taps it anyway out of sheer curiosity. The next system window appears, indicating the mutated immense strength ant has been detected with a fusion rate of 47%, and asks whether he'd like to fuse with the symbiotic egg. Without hesitation, he presses yes through his chibi avatar's little hands and the fusion process initiates. Since he already knows his current chi probably isn't sufficient to hatch the Skeleton Knight anyway, he figures he might as well see what his mutated immense strength ant becomes after fusing with a legendary level egg. Once the evolution process concludes, he checks the stats anxiously. To his surprise, the pet remains at the mortal level despite fusing with a legendary egg. The little creature now possesses an innate skill called Skeleton Pierce Attack at rank 10. Hoping this might be sufficient to deal with the silver-winged mosquito, he jumps into the game, and as the mosquito comes swooping down, he quickly summons the skeleton ant and commands it to intercept. The ant deploys the skeleton pierce skill, and sharp spikes erupt from the ground, aiming at the flying mosquito. Despite hundreds of needles shooting upward, they're not enough to stop the creature. The mosquito zips past every single spike and launches straight at Joe. Seeing it coming, Joe balls his fist and delivers a devastating blow, only to connect with bare ground. After missing that window, his avatar is once again sliced into two clean halves. Yet another defeat. He stares at the screen, increasingly fixated on whatever insane technique this creature keeps using against him. The next day arrives and Joe is visibly nervous as he asks Xuan once more whether they're really writing it. Xuan flashes a pleased smile and confirms they absolutely are. He explains it's a legendary level jadeite white tiger, and that hatching it cost him tremendously. As they both mount the tiger, it launches forward at such extraordinary speed that poor Joe starts bleeding from the exertion. He privately reflects that a car would have been infinitely more comfortable. Once they reach the city, Xuan swipes his access card through a scanner and a soldier waves them through. They board an elevator that descends deep into an underground facility. There they learn that Luoyang was once the capital of 13 ancient countries. After the dimensional storm intervened, the entire region sank and connected to a mysterious subterranean world, now known as the Underground Buddha City. When they finally reach the bottom and the elevator doors open, they're greeted by an unexpectedly bustling scene. Crowds of people wandering around like tourists, vendors operating stalls and selling goods. Joe curiously asks whether this is really a dimensional realm, since it's hard to believe students would set up vendor stalls here. Xuan explains that the military has secured the perimeter to maintain safety near the entrance, but the goods being sold here aren't particularly impressive. He proudly adds that he possesses an exploration mat used internally by the military. Joe isn't surprised. There's genuinely nothing this playboy can't afford. As they continue walking, Xuan explains there's supposedly an underground lotus pond somewhere within, where the Buddha heart lotus resides. While strolling, Joe spots that familiar palm-shaped emblem. He quickly photographs it and another app materializes on his phone, confirmation that this location is also a dungeon in the game. Xuan tells him to stop taking photos and keep up. The two continue inward, and after considerable walking, they arrive at a breathtaking sight, a vast pond completely covered in lotus flowers. Xuan points out that this is the Buddha heart lotus, and it turns out there's a creature whose symbiotic form takes the shape of the lotus's heart. Joe wonders why the flowers don't grow closer to the shore where they'd be more accessible, or why they can't simply swim across to grab one. Xuan bluntly explains that the water in this pond is so corrosive it dissolves flesh on contact. Anyone who wades in ends up as a skeleton. It's strictly off limits. Just then, someone else intrudes on their conversation. This newcomer is sporting angelic wings, and after hovering in midair for a moment, adds that the only viable way to reach the flowers is by flying over the toxic acid-filled pond. Almost immediately, the otherwise normal-looking flowers detect the threat. Their delicate petals transform into blade-like projectiles and shoot directly at the winged man. But he's quick. He summons his sword and meets the projectiles head-on with a powerful slash, cutting down the flower and sending petals raining down like blood. Joe is genuinely awed by this display. Xuan mentions that this is expected from the Liu family, renowned for their exceptional swordsmanship. He adds that this winged individual, known as Liu Xuan, isn't even among the family's strongest. Despite saying this, Xuan can't stop staring enviously at those impressive wings, privately thinking how extraordinary it would be to have a flying symbiotic pet. He then suggests to Joe that they explore elsewhere since other dimensional creatures might be nearby. He also notes that this entire area has been flagged by the military as an unknown danger zone. Joe asks what specifically makes it so dangerous. Xuan shows him his phone screen, which highlights how many military personnel have died exploring this area, not from combat injuries, but from sudden organ failure. For safety's sake, Xuan advises careful decision-making. Just as they're about to move on, the swamp begins bubbling violently. A massive lotus flower rises from the depths, its petals adorned with Buddha faces. It seems they've finally located the threat they'd been trying to avoid. The giant Buddha lotus immediately reacts and prepares for confrontation. The winged man quickly summons one wing and transforms it into a winged pony to maneuver, but the Buddha lotus isn't playing around. It fires an enormous red beam at the pony, reducing it to bones instantly. The once confident winged man begins falling toward the acid pool, and Joe calls out to him. Xuan is convinced this person is finished the moment he hits the water, But remarkably, Lu lands on a lotus flower leaf and hops clear of the toxic surface. Xuan realizes this person's chai fighting skill involved some form of lightness or agility technique, but he's still a considerable distance from solid ground. Xuan turns to Zhou and asks what on earth he's doing. It turns out Zhou is testing something. He's submerging his symbiotic pet Gauntlet into the toxic water. Surprisingly, the corrosive acid can't harm his weapon. It only burns organic flesh. With his plan formed, Zhou withdraws his hand, lowers his symbiotic pet into the acid, and stands ready. Xuan asks what he's planning, and Zhou simply states he's going to help the man stuck out there. Meanwhile, Lu is leaping from leaf to leaf trying to avoid the acid, but solid landing spots are rapidly disappearing. His only remaining option appears to be direct contact with the corrosive water. To make things worse, the Buddha Lotus fires another laser beam at him. Just as the situation appears hopeless, the swamp water begins bubbling again, and Zhou's skeleton ant emerges from within. Lu is startled by this unexpected creature, and the ant swiftly moves through the air, intercepting the incoming laser and taking the hit directly. Being skeletal in composition, the ant is completely unaffected by either the acid or the energy beams. Lu finds a surface to land on, the back of Zhou's ant. Zhou commands his skeleton ant to retreat. The ant's eyes begin glowing and it marches steadily toward the shore. The Buddha Lotus fires more lasers, but they accomplish about as much as tape on a spacesuit window. The ant picks up speed and eventually reaches solid ground. Zhou stands watching calmly as Lu hops off the ant's back. Once Lu's feet touch solid ground, he asks Zhou his name. Zhou introduces himself. Lu thanks him sincerely for the rescue, but Zhou tries to downplay it, saying it was nothing significant. Lu insists he takes debts seriously and promises to repay Zhou properly for what he did today. Meanwhile, Xuan is completely blown away by the skeleton ant and immediately asks what kind of creature this is. Zhou explains it's a skeleton ant. Xuan is enormously impressed. Not only is the ant immune to the corrosive acid, but it shrugs off the lotus's attacks entirely. He tells Zhou to send the ant into the swamp to see whether it can defeat the monster, confident the flower must be harboring something valuable. But Zhou suspects this isn't an ordinary mutated Buddha heart lotus, it might be a full legendary level creature. And since this is reality, he isn't willing to risk losing his skeleton ant. Zhou quickly recalls the ant and Xuan asks why he's being so cautious, pointing out that it's just a symbiotic pet and defeating the monster could yield something far more valuable. But Zhou makes it clear he isn't willing to gamble with his skeleton ant and begins walking off. Once they return to the mansion, Xuan is visibly disappointed, frustrated that he used 2 entry passes and came away with nothing worthwhile. He worries that news about the giant Buddha heart lotus will spread and someone else will claim it first. While holding his phone, Zhou tells Xuan he's heading back to his room and asks for a copy of the Buddha city map, which might prove useful eventually. Xuan hands it over and Zhou retreats to his room, leaving the playboy puzzling over why he looks so pleased. Once inside, Zhou smears blood on his phone screen and the Lotus Flower app boots up. He finds himself in the underground Buddha City dungeon, surprised to see Buddha heart lotus flowers carpeting the water all the way to the shoreline. Unlike the real-world version, the giant lotus flower, however, is nowhere in sight. Shrugging off this disappointment, he begins clearing monsters in the dungeon. Meanwhile, back in reality, the Buddha heart lotus has awakened once more. Other people, having heard about it through Xuan's stories, are eager to challenge it. The lackey of one prominent figure is visibly impressed to see his boss call out his top-tier legendary creature, a golden-eyed hawk. The cocky boss, adjusting his glasses dramatically, sends his golden eagle to assault the Buddha heart lotus flower. Back in the game, Zhou is weaving between laser attacks, cutting down lotus flowers left and right. His skeleton ant delivers a finishing strike to one flower, causing it to drop a crystal. After slaying so many creatures, he finally obtains something worthwhile. He examines the skill crystal and realizes he hasn't come across much information about the Buddha heart lotus's chai fighting skill before. Given the flower's attack style, which appears to involve concealed weaponry, he decides to absorb the crystal. As he absorbs it, he notices the effects manifesting in real life as well. The warm sensation spreading through him is completely unlike the pain he felt absorbing the power punch crystal. This new warmth suggests an intriguing different kind of power, and he starts contemplating how it might enhance his capabilities. Zhou's heart feels strangely at peace, as though touched by something celestial. The system notification appears, new skill acquired, meditation, rank 7. It's a strength-based skill he never expected to gain. Curious about its effects, he concentrates and blue energy surrounds him from every direction. But after a short while, he's disappointed to find that the only sensation is a soothing warmth. No obvious combat enhancement, no immediate visible impact. He thinks about Xuan and considers that even the playboy might not fully understand the chai fighting skill of the Buddha Heart Lotus, which is probably why he never mentioned it. Joe gets caught off guard by a sudden laser attack, but blocks it just in time. His excitement spikes when he spots a Buddha Heart Lotus monster appearing in the game, just as he hoped. He eagerly commands his skeleton ant to charge. The skeleton ant leaps into action while the Buddha Heart Lotus counters with red laser energy bursts. But these lasers barely scratch the ant. As the flower begins submerging back into the water, Joe grins, thinking the flower is running scared. He tells his ant to finish it. Just as the ant closes in, the flower's enormous mouth snaps open, lined with sharp teeth, and swallows the ant whole. Joe's grin disappears and his confidence collapses as he realizes the flower had a devastating trick waiting. Since he can't approach the swamp without his skeleton ant, he decides to head toward the restricted zone Xuan mentioned. Even if he dies, he figures it won't matter much. He kind of wanted to respawn anyway. With that reasoning, he walks into the restricted area. Once inside, he finds himself in a crumbling place with flowing water and ancient Buddha statues. As he climbs the stairs, he notices the strange absence of any monsters whatsoever. Then he spots it. The restricted zone lies just ahead. It turns out to be a small Buddhist temple, and while he thinks of it as small, it certainly doesn't look small at all. He starts walking toward it, but after just a few steps, the game is over. He didn't even notice when he died. He re-smears the screen with blood and tries running directly inside this time. But once again, his avatar's body begins twisting and the game ends. This time he observes more carefully. When the character died, the internal organs appeared to distort slightly. He recalls what Xuan said about military soldiers in this area. No visible external injuries, death entirely from organ failure. It's now clear even experienced military personnel couldn't handle this. After so many failed attempts, he throws his phone aside and decides to sleep. The next day opens with hearty laughter. Xuan is thoroughly amused. Apparently news spread about the Buddha Heart Lotus, and some people couldn't wait, ended up charging it, and got absolutely destroyed. Joe steps out and asks what's so funny. Xuan explains that last night, a senior student sent his legendary level golden-eyed hawk against the Buddha Heart Lotus from above, and every single feather got burned off. He finds the failure hilarious. Joe reminds Xuan that if they had kept fighting yesterday, they would have been the ones everyone was laughing at. Xuan also mentions that news has gone viral on the college forum, and students from multiple grade levels are reportedly planning attempts against the giant lotus. Joe asks whether the military isn't going to intervene and eliminate the creature. Xuan explains that while the lotus is powerful, there are likely military and college personnel who could handle it. But since no action has been taken yet, it appears they're deliberately holding off. According to Federation regulations, military intervention is only warranted if a monster exceeds a certain danger threshold, unless special circumstances arise. It's a deliberate policy designed to give the younger generation opportunities to prove themselves and gather resources. Just then, a familiar knock at the door. Xuan calls out that he's coming. Meanwhile, Joe's phone rings with his father calling. When he answers, his father asks whether Joe is currently in Luoyang. Joe confirms he is and asks if something is wrong. His father smiles and explains that his stepmother, Lan, wants to meet Joe and take him to dinner. Joe immediately starts manufacturing lame excuses to avoid meeting his apparently attractive stepmother. Just take the opportunity, honestly. But just then, Xuan calls out that there's a visitor at the door asking specifically for Joe. As Joe starts walking toward the door, his father mentions that Jing volunteered to come and pick Joe up, and is already on her way. And speaking of Jing, the visitor at the door turns out to be exactly her. Joe starts having a very bad feeling about all of this, and his worst thoughts are confirmed when he actually sees his stepsister standing on the doorstep. Xuan is shocked to realize Joe is connected to the prominent Ang family and that his father married Yang Lan. Joe quickly clarifies to his friend that he personally has nothing to do with the Ang family, it's purely his father's marriage. And Jing gets irritated hearing this characterization and pouts briefly, then tells him the driver is already waiting outside so they should go. Joe has no real choice but to go along with it. He inwardly facepalms himself. As much as he wants to avoid the Ang family, he keeps getting pulled deeper into their orbit. He tells Xuan he's heading out, and Xuan gives him a casual okay sign. Joe follows his stepsister outside. She immediately asks whether he practiced the sun shooting spell. Joe reminds her that their father said he didn't arrange to have it delivered to Joe. The girl gets visibly flustered and demands to know whether he's implying she was trying to trick him with a fake spell. Then, in her classic sharp style, she annoyingly informs him that she's actually glad he didn't practice it, and explains that she gave it to him precisely because she intends to use it against him. Joe has no idea what her actual issue is or why she's so hostile toward him. He also privately notes it doesn't really matter either way, since he's already absorbed the Lost Immortal Sutra and can't practice any other chai spells now. She tells him to get in the car. Once they're inside the luxury vehicle, someone is secretly photographing Joe from a discreet distance. These people appear to be federal agents, and they've assembled a comprehensive profile on him. The assistant explains to her senior that Joe graduated from Goa High School, ranked second in his cohort, and was considered an outstanding student overall. He's currently residing in Loyang, which explains why they failed to locate him back in Goa province. The senior concludes that Joe appears to have no meaningful connection to Jin Daoksan. But then the assistant reveals something extraordinarily interesting. Zhou Lingfeng, Joe's father, is the man who recently married a widow from the Ang family. This news visibly shocks the senior, who can't comprehend why Yang Lan would choose someone like Zhou Lingfeng, and wonders whether he has connections to certain Outlanders. The assistant explains that while Zhou Lingfeng did reach the legendary level years ago, he's too old to be recruited by the Outlanders. Perhaps Yang Lan is simply attracted to someone like him for personal reasons. The senior objects, insisting Wang Lan isn't that type of woman. He explains that when the Ang family's master died, the family descended into chaos with many powerful figures coveting their assets. Ang Qianzu, her son, was only 13 at the time. He questions whether someone as sharp and calculating as Wang Lan would ever marry someone genuinely incompetent. Regardless, he instructs the assistant to bring Zhou Wen in for questioning, and she agrees. He also insists the Ang family must not hear anything about this. The next scene brings us to a grand mansion. Joe steps out of the car feeling anxious, thoroughly impressed by the opulence surrounding him. He finally meets his father alongside his stepmother. His stepmother greets him warmly, expressing genuine excitement about meeting him for the first time. At the dinner table, food is served generously, and his stepmother encourages everyone to eat. She offers him some lobster, which apparently is also her daughter and Jing's absolute favorite. And Jing nods enthusiastically in anticipation of eating the lobster, but her mother deflates her by saying that since Joe is their guest, he should have the first serving. And Jing is clearly not pleased about her food being redirected toward Joe. She fixes him with death glares so intense that Joe can practically feel the heat coming off her face. His stepmother quietly tells Joe to ignore Jing, and whispers that she's intentionally making Jing feel this way as a small punishment for bullying him before. Joe nervously takes a piece of lobster and stuffs it into his mouth. It's genuinely delicious, but he cannot shake the confusion about her motivations or why she keeps staring at him like that. The mother seems fundamentally different from Jing in personality. They spend the evening together like this. As Joe prepares to leave, his stepmother invites him to simply move in with them and live as a proper family. Joe quickly declines, pointing out that he'll need to live on campus once school begins and is currently staying with his friend. Privately, he knows full well that Jing would probably make his life genuinely miserable if he stayed here. His stepmother then offers him a card and tells him to take it. Joe asks what it's for. She explains it's an access card for a private single-occupancy dormitory at Sunset College. His father had mentioned Joe prefers living alone, so she arranged it without asking first. She hopes he'll accept it. A private dormitory is exactly what Joe needs for uninterrupted gaming sessions. He accepts the card and wonders how his father knew he preferred solitude. He thanks her and addresses her as Madam, which immediately triggers her. She smooths her hair and pointedly asks if she really looks that old, telling him he can call her anything except Madam. He's learning the hard way that every woman, regardless of age, is sensitive about being addressed as elderly. He returns to Xuan's mansion and finds it completely silent. Xuan is out again. This is fine news. Energized by the hearty dinner, Joe is ready to game without any interruptions. He dives back in and puts everything into clearing the ant nest dungeon. Once finished, he claims another symbiotic egg. He checks the stats and reads that it's a mutated immense strength ant with an innate power punch ability at rank 2. The attributes are noticeably inferior to his previous one, which is disappointing. Just then, a winged mosquito takes a swing at him, but he ducks just in time. He's irritated by the ambush, but before he can counterattack, the mosquito comes at him again at full speed. He dodges again, staying alert because he knows a single successful hit from this creature ends everything instantly. The mosquito charges again at full throttle, and this time he seizes the moment, running directly toward it. As the monster strikes, he meets it head-on and just barely escapes with only a graze across his cheek. Joe readies his fist, channeling his immense strength ant gauntlet. Since the mosquito is invisible to the naked eye, he closes his eyes and extends his senses. He detects the creature positioned behind him. With his fist charged and ready, he delivers a devastating blow that sends the mosquito tumbling to the ground. He then leaps and deploys Ash Palm, energy intensifying into a massive explosion. Even after that brutal punishment, the mosquito is still clinging on. He jumps again and unleashes a rapid sequence of powerful punches until the winged mosquito finally goes down. As the mosquito fades, it leaves behind a symbiotic egg. His expression lights up with excitement at the sight. He now has two options: hatch the egg or fuse it with the mutated immense strength ant's symbiotic egg at a 20% fusion rate. He's not thrilled with the low fusion rate, especially since the creature he just defeated was also ant-based. He worries that attempting to hatch it and failing would waste the egg entirely, so he swallows his hesitation and hits yes. Suddenly, an empty void opens, beginning to draw out his chai. His heart hammers as dark red energy envelops him in a creepy, indescribable sensation. It feels as though sharp teeth are tearing through his back. As the hatching process concludes, he's on the verge of tears and violently coughing up blood. A strong suspicion is forming that wings have grown on his back, which would explain the intense focused pain in that area. Between the blood loss from repeated mosquito battles and the real-world effects of the hatching process, exhaustion finally claims him completely and he collapses. His phone rings, but in the next scene, words are floating around him, pulling him back to consciousness. Groggy, he halts himself upright. He's genuinely relieved the real-world pain wasn't as severe as what he felt inside the game, otherwise he might not have survived. He smears blood on his phone screen to check his status, dreading that the hatching might have failed. But to his immense relief, the egg has successfully hatched. Eager to see his new companion, he quickly summons his avatar. When the silver-winged mosquito finally materializes, it's absolutely tiny, just a minuscule little mosquito. His shocked reaction echoes through the mansion as he stares at the completely anticlimactic creature. He checks the stats and reads that it's a silver-winged mosquito larvae, classified as a legendary pet. He has no idea what being a larvae entails in practical terms, but he notes that the attributes are shockingly weak for something supposedly legendary, especially compared to how terrifyingly lethal it was when it was trying to kill him. Despite its dismal stats, it does look oddly cute. His phone then beeps with a system announcement. The silver-winged mosquito is extremely hungry and needs to be fed immediately. He has no idea what this tiny creature eats. When he taps yes to feed it, a system window appears asking whether he'd like to feed it the mutated skeleton ant or the mutated immense strength ant. Joe is deeply frustrated. This picky little creature wants to eat his other symbiotic pets. He absolutely doesn't want to sacrifice them for this. He starts muttering about whoever designed a mosquito that refuses to eat normal game monsters. Meanwhile, the little creature, still undeniably cute, is drooling and showing every sign of extreme hunger, ready to consume anything to satisfy itself. With no other options remaining, Joe reluctantly sacrifices the mutated immense strength ant's symbiotic egg. The moment he confirms, swirling energy envelops the little creature as its hunger is finally satiated. Once feeding is complete, Joe decides to check out its symbiotic form, since this larvae version clearly isn't going to contribute anything meaningful in combat. As the mosquito shifts into its symbiotic form, a pair of wings unfolds behind his avatar. He excitedly takes to the air, testing out this new ability to fly. The speed is exhilarating and the surge of power is genuinely thrilling. The wings provide impressive agility, though they can't carry him particularly high. His flight is limited to just a few meters above ground. Since he can now fly, continuing to hunt ants seems pointless. He decides to push deeper into the caves to explore what lies further ahead. As he ventures deeper, more and more ants appear and the path keeps narrowing. Monsters are packed in from every direction. Viewing the scene from above, he counts countless creatures and has absolutely no idea how to fight through all of them. Then he remembers he can fly. He figures he can simply soar over their heads without making contact. That plan fails immediately. The small ants band together and form a giant hand, lashing out at him from below. They swarm him from every direction. Once surrounded, he deploys his Ash Palm skill and obliterates the entire swarm in a single moment, clearing the area completely. The impact is so powerful it punches a hole directly through the floor, and he falls into a space containing nothing but a single large boulder. Just as he thinks he's safe, he notices something near the boulder. It doesn't take long to realize he's stumbled directly into an ant nest, and the creatures are converging on him from all sides. Once the flying insects completely overwhelm his avatar, it finally goes down. He's pretty roughed up, and it's disappointing you can't explore the dungeon any further. His silver-winged mosquito needs time to recover before he can fly again. His stomach starts growling. He heads to the fridge and finds it completely bare. He has no choice but to head out and buy food. As he steps outside, a car quietly begins following him. Inside, a voice reports that the target has left the building and is moving toward the main street. They ask whether they should move in now. A woman known as Lisa, in the process of applying lipstick, tells her subordinates it's too crowded at the moment. Their superior has instructed them to remain undercover and she'll handle the situation herself. As Joe strolls down the sidewalk, Lisa quickly positions herself in his path, having made herself look as attractive as possible. She's determined to charm him the moment he sets eyes on her. Joe continues walking completely oblivious. She hides behind a wall and waits for the perfect moment. Eventually she steps out, pretends to trip, and falls to the ground. Putting on a convincing performance of helplessness with fake tears, she calls him handsome and asks for his assistance. Joe, being the complete Chad he is, walks straight past her without a second glance. This absolutely incenses her. What stings most is that this person didn't even register her appearance. She stands up and begins following him, preparing to deploy her final trump card. Meanwhile, Joe is lost in thought, contemplating how effortless it must be for people who can fly to access the Lotus Pond, and still trying to figure out how to deal with the blood-striped Buddha Heart Lotus. Suddenly, the girl grabs his hand and demands to know why he's walking so fast. Joe, baffled, asks who she even is. She claims she got lost and hurt herself when she fell, and is simply asking for basic assistance. Joe pulls out his phone and dials emergency services, telling her help is on the way. She quickly insists he put his phone away and just take her home himself. Joe shrugs her off and says he's going to get dinner and doesn't have time for this. The woman's patience runs out completely. She's been humiliated and has reached her absolute limit. She unleashes her abilities and lunges at him, fully intending to knock him out and drag him back by force. An explosion erupts from their clash, and as the dust settles, the woman stands alone. Joe has launched himself upward and now stands atop a signpost. It doesn't take him long to recognize her. She's one of the federal agents he spotted tracking Jin Da-Oxen that night. Evidently, she underestimated him. He's considerably more agile than she anticipated. Growing serious, she begins summoning fire. Joe simultaneously dials emergency services and reports he's being attacked. Seeing this, the woman grits her teeth. If police arrive and see her assaulting someone, her cover will be blown and she'll attract precisely the kind of attention she's trying to avoid. Reluctantly, she begins withdrawing, telling him she's letting him off this time. With that, she disappears from the area. Joe lets out a long breath of relief and drops back down. He's still puzzled about why Federation agents are targeting him when he hasn't committed any crime. Then it clicks. They probably think he's connected to Jin Da-Oxen. He calls Xuan, and when the playboy answers, he sounds genuinely surprised and pleased that Joe is actually reaching out voluntarily. But Joe skips the pleasantries and tells Xuan to find somewhere private immediately. He has something important to share. Once he's explained everything, Xuan is shocked to hear Joe actually encountered Jin Da-Oxen, and also expresses jealousy. He would love to meet someone with that level of legendary status. Joe is relieved he didn't mention the Lost Immortal Sutra. Xuan would have been completely overwhelmed by that information. Xuan then explains that based on Joe's description, he's fairly certain the hyenas are behind this. He explains the hyenas are a specialized federal organization that handles situations the government can't openly address. They're ruthless, willing to pursue any means to achieve their objectives, and notorious throughout the Federation, hence the name. Joe then asks whether Xuan can get him enrolled in college ahead of schedule. He explains that while the hyenas, the Special Inspection Unit, are extremely powerful, they can't openly violate the law. They'll be significantly more cautious about operating within Sunset College's boundaries. Xuan agrees it's a smart plan, then jokingly reminds Joe that Luoyang is effectively Aang family territory. If Joe simply moved in with the Aang family, nobody in the world would dare touch him. Joe firmly states he'd rather not discuss the Aang family and asks Xuan to drop it. After making that small joke, Xuan reassures Joe he'll arrange early enrollment. Joe ends the call and stands there gritting his teeth, genuinely frustrated by the mounting complications in his life. The only real solution to all of this is becoming considerably stronger. The next scene shifts to the Special Inspection Unit of the federal government. The senior officer is visibly agitated and is reprimanding Lisa. He's furious that she broke cover and is worried about explaining this to his own superior. Lisa quickly apologizes, admitting she miscalculated both Joe's preferences and his actual capabilities. She then straightens up, and requests a second opportunity, promising she'll deliver results this time. The senior tells her it's no longer simple to get close to Joe and instructs her to examine some documents. The situation is more complicated than she realizes. Lisa is curious and confused. The senior explains his source investigated the secrets of Yuang Lan and the Ang family, and everything is contained in those files. When Lisa opens the file, she's stunned to discover Joe has actually been enrolled in Sunset College ahead of schedule. What truly baffles her is that the specific spot he was given previously belonged to Ang Jing. How could the Ang family hand something like that to an outsider? For those wondering what this is referring to, it concerns something called the God-bestowed gift. He explains the Ang family used their sole opportunity to reassign the candidate to Joe. He's astonished at how everything, from the notorious Jin Daoxan to the Ang family itself, keeps converging on Joe Wen, making the situation increasingly tangled and complex. Meanwhile, Joe randomly sneezes somewhere and wonders if he's catching a cold. He has no idea he's already become the target of a federal agency that's going to irritate him throughout the entire series. Holding his backpack, he stands before the gates of the prestigious Sunset College, looking genuinely relieved to have finally arrived. He checks the key card his stepmother gave him. It says Four Seasons Garden, which must be his dormitory building. He climbs the stairs, swipes the card, and enters his room. Honestly, it looks more like a 5-star hotel suite than any dormitory, a place where, to be fair, most students would be content to binge on games and snacks. In any case, this marks the beginning of his new chapter at college. When he opens his backpack, he realizes he packed almost nothing useful for this new stage of life, just some clothing and not much else. Time for a shopping trip. He pulls out the campus map and starts locating nearby shops. As he's checking his phone, a girl starts descending the staircase. He looks up, and it's An Jing. He's surprised to see her here and asks whether she lives upstairs. She seems momentarily taken aback, but doesn't bother responding. She simply pouts and walks past, ignoring him entirely. Once outside the dormitory building, Joe checks his phone again and finds it odd that the shops he expected in that location aren't there. He wonders if he took a wrong turn. The street is completely deserted with nobody around to ask for directions. Then he hears an unexpected sound, a meow. He looks around and realizes someone nearby is playing with a cat. He follows the sound and notices the male voice interacting with the kitten sounds strangely familiar. And it's no surprise, the person crouching down and playing with the cats is Gan, the same intimidating person who lost to Joe in the punch wager. Seeing this supposedly terrifying individual getting cozy with small kittens is an enormous shock to Joe, who never imagined this particular person would have a soft spot for anything. Joe musters his courage and calls out to Gan. Silence falls instantly. Gan immediately releases the kittens and transforms back into his intimidating self. He warns Joe that if he tells anyone about what he just saw, there will be serious consequences. With fury visibly brewing behind his eyes, he fixes Joe with an intense glare. Joe, feeling the pressure, immediately says he didn't see anything and was simply wandering around looking for shops. He adds that if Gan can point him in the right direction, he'll leave immediately. This response appears to satisfy Gan. He retracts his threatening posture. As he walks away, he tells Joe that this is the old campus and advises him to follow this road until he finds the guards, who can show him the way to the shops. Gan stops one more time, shoots a final intense glare with those bloodshot eyes, and warns Joe to leave the kittens alone. With that, he turns and walks away. Joe lingers for a moment, gently patting the small kittens. He reflects on how after the dimensional storm, humans gained the ability to form contracts with creatures from other dimensions, creatures that are more intelligent, more obedient, and possess extraordinary powers. Most people have completely stopped caring about ordinary local animals, which makes it genuinely surprising that someone as frightening and formidable as Gan maintains such a deep attachment to these small, ordinary creatures. Back in the dormitories, Joe feels like he's on a losing streak. He's increasingly annoyed that the game keeps defeating him for no obvious reason. He draws blood onto his screen and his avatar reappears in the game, standing once again on the same stairs where he keeps dying after his insides get twisted. There's some mysterious force between him and the small Buddhist temple that eliminates anyone who dares step forward. Despite numerous attempts to approach the temple from multiple angles, even trying to fly without touching the ground, he gets killed the moment he enters this area. He's tried everything conceivable, but simply cannot cross these stairs. Since it's a game, there should theoretically be a way through no matter how difficult things get. The Skeleton Knight and the Mosquito were both incredibly powerful, but he eventually found a method to overcome each of them. This situation, however, feels fundamentally different. He's being eliminated without any clear warning or pattern. It no longer resembles a boss encounter. It feels more like a sealed door he can't open without a specific key. If he wants to access the small Buddhist temple, he needs to find whatever that key is. The only area he can explore in Buddhist City right now is the Lotus Pond, and there's nothing useful there at the moment. Reflecting on the meditation skill he obtained, he decides to try activating it. This skill doesn't improve offensive output or defensive capability, it simply consumes chi to sustain a specific state. With meditation activated, he descends the stairs again. The moment he reaches the bottom, he leaps, and this time he survives. The sight of surviving that jump fills him with pure joy, and he strides forward into the small Buddhist temple, thrilled at finally making progress, or so he thinks. Activating the meditation skill is consuming his chi at a devastating rate, and he's about to run out entirely. He dies again. He summons his blood avatar back immediately, only to be stopped again as his chi drains at lightning speed. Frustrated, he pricks his thumb and draws blood once more, summoning his avatar again. This time he runs flat out, determined to charge through the chi draining area before his bar depletes. But he doesn't make it across before running dry again. Not giving up, he tries once more. He considers that his speed simply isn't high enough to get through this zone. He starts thinking about deploying the mosquito's wings instead. Feeling briefly smug about this idea, he activates the wings and charges forward, but his smugness evaporates almost immediately. The wings significantly increase his speed, but they also consume chi at an absurd rate, especially when stacked on top of the meditation skill. He's forced to finally acknowledge what he already knew. Getting through this area is impossible with a rank 7 meditation skill. He needs a significantly higher ranked version. He decides the best option for now is to return to the Lotus Pond and look for something that might help. Just as he's about to leave, his phone rings. It's Xuan, casually telling him to come to the Lotus Pond and watch what happens. Joe asks what's so interesting. Xuan just smirks forward and cryptically says Joe will understand when he gets there. When Joe arrives, he spots his stepsister facing off against a large, gorilla-like guy. Murmurs ripple through the gathered crowd. People are saying she had already achieved legendary level before even starting enrollment, and the person challenging her is Yanglu, a third-tier legendary fighter. Apparently, this gorilla claimed he would personally defeat the Buddha Heart Lotus as a gift for her, and Jing looks at the flower and, with her characteristic confidence, tells him not to waste his breath on something as trivial as flowers. She's completely certain he's all talk and wouldn't last 10 seconds against the blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus. Her dismissal infuriates Yanglu, who feels the humiliation of being written off so completely. Xuan, meanwhile, is genuinely impressed. Hearing the flower's proper name, blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus, confirms that Jing has thoroughly researched this monster. The lackey Mew also appears, pointing out that Yanglu is trying to impress the Yang family, which is why he's putting on this performance. Xuan notes that while the Yang family is renowned, they're nowhere near the Yang family's level, and Jing would never be interested in someone like Yanglu. The lackey agrees, adding that the only person truly worthy of her is Xuan himself. The playboy immediately shuts down this suggestion, stating he has zero interest in Jing. He's not the type to pursue his friend's sister, and that friend, of course, is Joe. When Joe finally appears at the scene, he sees his stepsister and asks Xuan whether he really summoned him here just to show off his sister. Xuan smirks and says that's not the main attraction. He notes that his sister has an admirer and, as her brother, it's only appropriate that he examine the man who's fallen for her. Meanwhile, Yanglu is seething after Jing's rejection. He's fully convinced that once he takes down the blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus, she'll have no choice but to take back her words and accept the gift. But Jing dismisses his determination as pointless and tells him to stop humiliating himself. That pushes Yanglu past his limit. He summons his pets and 2 white eagle-like birds materialize in the sky. Mew is struck by how impressive these are. 2 legendary-level silvery eagles simultaneously. Yanglu barks orders and they immediately streak toward the lotus flower. The lotus doesn't just sit there. It fires a red laser directly into one of the eagles. Yanglu laughs it off, insisting such weak tricks can't stop his pets. As the eagles disperse the red blood laser attack and counterattack the flower, Mew is awestruck again. Those feathers are somehow immune to blood erosion. It's no wonder they're at the legendary level. By this point, he's starting to think the Buddha Heart Lotus might actually be in real danger. But that's when Joe speaks up, saying it won't be that simple, and the battle is nowhere near over. As the eagles continue clawing at the resilient petals, the lotus flower begins awakening properly. The petals spread wide and the eagles immediately retreat. The flower fixes the persistent monsters with a cold, menacing gaze that sends a visible chill down Yanglu's spine. He's beginning to realize he may have taken on more than he can handle. Xuan explains that while most lotus creatures are relatively weak, this particular one is an entirely different species. But Yanglu isn't ready to concede without throwing everything he has at it. He rapidly transforms his eagles into fiery phoenix-like forms, their blazing bodies charging the lotus at extreme speed and deploying a golden claw ability. The flower, however, immediately conjures a crimson blood shield, stopping the phoenix charges before they can deliver significant damage. The gorilla is stunned that the flower even has defensive Chai fighting skills, but he quickly identifies a critical weakness. The blood shield only protects the area directly around the flower, leaving the top exposed. He decides to keep the flower occupied with his phoenix eagles, while sending a third one soaring upward to attack from directly above where there's no coverage. Joe immediately realizes what's about to happen. The gorilla is attacking from above, and this triggers a direct memory of his own game experience where the monster devoured him from that exact angle. He shouts that it's a trap, but before Yanglu can process what Joe is saying, his eagle has already reached the flower's open upper mouth. The monster's massive jaw, lined with razor-sharp teeth, snaps open, and in a split second, one of the flaming eagles is swallowed in a single gulp. The flower lets out a satisfied burp after its roasted meal. The onlookers are horrified. Yanglu has just lost one of his prized eagles in a single instant. He quickly recalls his remaining familiar and can only stand there grinding his teeth in helpless frustration. Yanglu then strides toward Joe, looming over him with characteristic swagger, and demands to know how Joe predicted that trap. Joe obviously can't explain that he's already fought this beast inside a video game. Fortunately, Mu jumps in and says it's obvious Joe knew. He ranked second in the real combat test of Goa province after all. Yanglu laughs dismissively. Mu doesn't let it slide, asking what's so funny. Shouldn't Yanglu feel even a little shame about losing a silvery eagle? If it were him, he'd have already dug himself a grave. Yanglu gets genuinely angry and demands to see the second-ranked student actually defeat the Lotus himself. Mu confidently responds that Joe can handle it effortlessly and will make it look easy. Unlike Yanglu, who just embarrassed himself in front of everyone, Joe stays silent, genuinely unsure what to say. He hasn't actually defeated the blood-striked Buddha in the game, and the real Lotus is showing moves that didn't appear in the game version either. Then his stepsister appears right in front of him, getting directly in his face and asking whether he can actually take down the blood-striped Buddha Heart Lotus. Joe doesn't know how to answer, but with her sharp, intense gaze locked onto him, he absolutely doesn't want to appear cowardly by admitting he can't handle it, so he just clenches his fists in silence. The gorilla starts chuckling and points out that Joe looks pretty scared, and that talking seems to be his primary skill. That's when Xuan steps in and expresses his personal desire to join Joe in taking this monster down. Yanglu is visibly startled by this unexpected development. The famous third son of the Li family getting directly involved was not part of his calculations. But he starts grinning, thinking that even the silvery eagles couldn't manage it. So these two are clearly just dreaming. He agrees and says he's looking forward to watching them fail. A short while later, the crowd is gathered on one side while Joe and his two allies face the other direction. Xuan is visibly frustrated that Mu provoked the gorilla and got them locked into this. Joe reminds him that pinching Mu's cheeks won't help now. They've accepted the challenge, so they need to focus on a real strategy. Joe is actually fairly confident. Even though his blood avatar alone wasn't enough to defeat the monster before, with all three of them working together and Xuan's two legendary level creatures providing support, the outcome might genuinely surprise everyone. The only real obstacle is figuring out how to get into the Lotus Pond. Joe admits he can't rely on his skeleton ant alone and can't protect all three of them simultaneously during the fight. Xuan also acknowledges he has no flying creatures and his current options barely manage to stay airborne. That's when Mu steps up, placing a mask over his face and saying leave it to him. He summons his pet, and a giant turtle drops from the sky and plummets directly into the acidic water. As it floats on the surface, its shell creates a solid elevated platform above the acid, giving them a stable foundation. Xuan is genuinely fascinated to see that Mu also possesses a mortal-level symbiotic pet. He assumed only Joe had companions of this caliber. The three of them ride atop the giant dragon-scale turtle and advance toward the flower. Mu tells Joe and Xuan to engage the flower while he commands his turtle to provide platform support from the sidelines. Both Joe and Xuan charge the monster simultaneously. The Buddha Lotus immediately launches crimson projectiles at the group. Joe instructs his ant to intercept them. The skeleton ant rises up, and takes the crimson projectiles head-on, shielding the team. Xuan spots his opening and slashes his sword at the monster. The flower retaliates with its crimson fluid attack again, but Xuan's slash cuts straight through it and connects directly with the flower. Meanwhile, Zhou's ant lets out a powerful roar and spikes erupt from the ground, driving directly into the flower's body. But this stubborn creature remains completely unfazed. It quickly unleashes its crimson substance again and obliterates those spikes like they don't exist. Seeing the familiar tactic, Zhou wonders if the flower is baiting them into attacking from above, but Xuan dismisses the idea and insists they can take it from the front. He begins pouring qi into his sword and disappears into thin air. Meanwhile, the monster unleashes a massive roar and a tornado-like force begins swirling within its mouth, creating heavy atmospheric pressure that makes it extremely difficult for Zhou to advance. But the armored Xuan holds his ground. Once his sword is fully charged, he comes crashing down on the monster like a meteor, and that single impact obliterates the lotus flower from the inside. As the petals begin burning away, a toad sitting within the flower begins spitting dark substance from its mouth towards Xuan, who is completely exhausted from his massive attack and is essentially falling helplessly. But before the dark substance can connect, Zhou's power punch erupts from a distance, flames completely obliterating the dark matter. Zhou's punch also destroys the platform Xuan was standing on in the process. Zhou immediately instructs Mu to catch Xuan while he handles the toad. Mu agrees quickly and Zhou lunges forward, leaping off his skeleton ant with his fist charged up with fiery energy. The toad spits more of its gooey substance at him. Zhou effortlessly sidesteps every blob. By now the toad knows it's finished. It braces for impact. Zhou's massive explosion takes it down completely, and when the flames finally dissipate, nothing remains of the toad except scattered blood. Suddenly Zhou notices Xuan is plummeting toward the acidic pond. The playboy is convinced Mu is deliberately letting him fall, and it's obvious when Mu smirks and says Xuan deserves to fall in. Meanwhile, Jing is already prepared to intervene if things deteriorate, but before she can act, Zhou swoops in and grabs his friend just in time, preventing him from hitting the acid. Xuan feels a flicker of embarrassment that Zhou has saved him yet again. Once they land on the dragon-scale turtle's shell, Mu starts yelling at Zhou, accusing him of hiding yet another symbiotic pet. Zhou just sighs with disappointment, reminding Mu that he had exactly one job and failed at it spectacularly. Then Xuan delivers a sharp slap across Mu's face, calling him a terrible actor. The slap sends Mu stumbling. He asks in genuine hurt why he was betrayed. The single slap has left Mu's face thoroughly rearranged, and he explains that Xuan simply cannot defeat his brother Li Mubi, because Mubi has already bought off everyone around them. But then Mu makes one last treacherous move. He shatters the dragon crystal platform Zhou and Xuan are standing on. He makes it clear that if he can't take down Xuan by himself, he'll drag everyone into the acid with him. As the rubble begins sinking into the corrosive water, things look genuinely grim for both of them. But just in time, a mysterious protective bubble encapsulates them before they can touch the acid. And behind this timely rescue is none other than Zhou's stepsister. The next scene takes us to the investigation office at Sunset College. Both Zhou and Xuan are questioned at length by an officer. Once everything is taken in, the officer simply tells them they're free to leave. Outside, Xuan looks genuinely disheartened, wondering aloud why everyone seems to be targeting him. Zhou then asks why his brother holds such a deep vendetta and is willing to go to these extreme lengths to have him killed. Xuan explains that he and his brother Li Mubi have been effectively estranged ever since their eldest brother passed away. While Mubi manages the family business alongside their father, Xuan himself has simply been living comfortably without any aspirations toward power. Zhou is curious why Mubi is so determined to eliminate him if it isn't about claiming power or wealth. Xuan says it's about something far beyond either of those things and suggests they find somewhere more private. Spies might be present nearby. A while later, scattered cola cans suggest they're back in Zhou's dormitory room. Zhou is notably unenthused about the mess his friend has already made. Xuan opens the conversation by asking whether Zhou understands the true scale of power differences between creature tiers: mortal, legendary, epic, and mythical. He explains that as the tiers escalate, the gap in power becomes so vast that mortal-level beings are essentially insects compared to mythical-level creatures. With that established, Xuan poses a question. How did humans who occupied the mortal class manage to kill the very first mythical-level creatures despite this overwhelming power gap? Zhou cuts straight to the answer, pointing out that according to historical records, The original 6 epic heroes of the Federation defeated one after 3 days and nights of sustained battle. Xuan immediately dismisses this as historical embellishment, pointing out that even with the greatest conceivable power gap, 100 epic heroes together couldn't have managed it, let alone just 6. The real reason the mythical creatures were defeated, Xuan reveals, is that humans had mythical symbiotic creatures fighting on their side. Zhou is completely stunned. He demands to know how humans could possibly have obtained mythical symbiotic pets before killing the mythical creatures, since typically, eggs can only be harvested after defeating the creature. Xuan explains this is what is called a god-bestowed gift. Someone bestowed upon the 6 heroes the power to face mythical creatures, in the form of larvae belonging to mythical creatures themselves. Zhou dismisses this as baseless mythology, but Xuan explains that the Federation established a top-secret department specifically to manage and conceal the actual history of the 6 heroes. Most people have no idea it exists. He further explains that this department is responsible for selecting specific individuals to receive god-bestowed gifts, just as the 6 heroes received theirs. Zhou starts genuinely considering whether this god-bestowed concept might actually be real, though he's uncertain why Xuan is sharing this with him specifically. Then everything crystallizes in his mind. He asks Xuan to confirm, and the playboy does so with pride. He reveals that his own father has designated him as the first heir in his family to receive the god-bestowed gift, and the only way for Li Mubi to claim those qualification rights is to kill Xuan. The following morning, Xuan is sleeping soundly while Zhou is busy manipulating his phone. He recalls the warning Xuan delivered last night, that by repeatedly saving Xuan's life, Zhou has disrupted Mubi's plans on multiple occasions, and now Mubi might be coming for Zhou directly as well. All of these concerns are driving Zhou to push deeper into the game and grow stronger as rapidly as possible. While he's thoroughly absorbed in his phone, a system notification pops up. The silver-winged mosquito is extremely hungry again. Zhou mutters his frustration at the system, asking whether it has any idea how much symbiotic eggs cost. But ultimately he knows he has no real choice. Feeding his companion is the only path to making it grow. The only way to obtain eggs is by defeating monsters, and lately every monster in the area trembles with fear at the sight of Zhou approaching with his bloodshot, sleep-deprived eyes. Meanwhile, on the college campus, students are gathered watching footage from the previous day's battle against the monster. They're visibly impressed by Xuan's legendary creatures, especially given that he's reportedly only at the ordinary cultivation level. Zhou's performance in a supporting capacity also earns genuine respect. Many observers note that if their third teammate hadn't betrayed them, they would have completely dismantled the flower's core. The girls are particularly buzzing about the fight, captivated by how impressively charismatic Xuan looked mid-battle. They turn to Wang, Xuan's sister, and ask if she can arrange for her brother to meet them sometime. But Wang seems entirely preoccupied watching footage of her own focus of interest, who is of course Zhou. She watches him in action with an undisguised smile. Over at the Federal Investigation Unit, the team is locked onto footage of Zhou's battle as well. They're genuinely astonished at how he anticipated the poison toad's attack and eliminated it with a single punch. Lisa points out that Zhou's physical abilities alone can't account for that level of performance. He must be using a high-tier chai spell, but the records show he was practicing bitter meditation, which isn't remotely sophisticated enough to explain what they're seeing. The senior investigator agrees with Lisa's observations and adds a layer of intrigue. During his time in Goa province, he had a brief opportunity to observe Zhou's capabilities personally. At that time, Zhou's skin showed a faint jade luster, a signature indicator of bitter meditation practice. That characteristic has completely vanished now, suggesting he's abandoned the practice entirely. Lisa asks whether the senior suspects Zhou dropped bitter meditation after years of dedication, and if so, who could have provided him with a superior chi technique that forced the switch. The senior pauses, then names 2 possibilities: the Ang family or undoubtedly Jin Daoxin. As viewers, we already know it was Jin Daoxin who gave Zhou the Lost Immortal Sutra, and notably, Jin Daoxin himself can feel his own technique weakening elsewhere, which means Zhou is awakening to his own power. Back at headquarters, the senior explains that Zhou met his stepmother Yuang Lan recently, but even if she gave him a new chi technique, there simply wouldn't have been enough time to master it. So ruling out the Yang family, the only remaining suspect is Jin Daoxin. The senior then instructs Lisa to formally charge Zhou Wen as an accomplice of Jin Daoxin and apply for a cross-district arrest warrant. It's finally time they interrogated Zhou face-to-face. Lisa agrees immediately and pulls up Zhou Wen's complete profile on her system. She's genuinely looking forward to capturing him and delivering some consequences. She then asks whether the Aang family will step in to protect Zhou while he's at college. The senior assures her that as long as they secure the warrant, there's no legal basis for the family to shield him. He also points out that since both Aang Tianzhu and Aang Jing have been actively working against Zhou, it's evident they don't want Zhou competing for the God-bestowed gift, meaning they probably never intended to protect him in the first place. The scene then shifts to Aang Jing, who appears hesitant as she stands outside Zhou's apartment. She's clearly reflecting on something. She recalls confronting her mother about why she chose Zhou as the God-bestowed gift candidate. She acknowledged his talent but argued that talent alone isn't sufficient. Besides, he's the kind of person who immediately reaches for his phone the moment he has any free time. But her stunningly beautiful, sharp-figured mother simply stated she'd already made her decision and had no interest in debating it. This infuriates Aang Jing to no end. She's determined to prove to her mother that she's significantly more worthy than Zhou. She eventually resolves to knock on the door, but before she can do much, Zhou opens it himself, still absorbed in his game. It takes him a moment to register that Aang Jing is standing on his doorstep. The arrogant stepsister then explains that her son's shooting spell is entirely legitimate, and he can practice it however he chooses. Zhou is baffled about what her actual objective is, whether she's here just to brag about her spell. Internally, he notes it doesn't matter anyway since he already has the Lost Immortal Sutra and can't take on additional chai spells. She then asks if he still doubts her, and if he does, she tells him to show the flash drive to their father, who will verify it personally. Zhou sighs and finally asks why she gave him the spell in the first place. The girl replies simply, to prove she's superior to him. She then asks whether he wasn't humiliated when she defeated him in high school. Zhou flashes a genuine smile and says not at all, he actually finds it admirable. This irritates her. She reminds him that she defeated him publicly, so it's natural he'd want to recover his pride and seek revenge. She then explains that she's observed his capabilities at the Lotus Pond and believes that with 3 months of practicing the sun shooting spell, he'll reach legendary level. She'll permit him to practice it, but afterward she plans to challenge him again. Zhou simply asks whether he can concede defeat in advance. This stubborn woman gets even more irritated and firmly tells him he must fight her again. She's completely mystified by how her mother ended up selecting this person. Eventually she withdraws and turns to head back to her dormitory. She leaves Zhou some cheek crystals as a prize, saying he's welcome to take whatever he wants since she won't be showing mercy when they fight. Zhou stands in silence, reflecting on the fact that she's a genuinely exceptional individual, recognized by the Federation, who reached legendary level at just 13 years old. He genuinely cannot understand why she's so fixated on fighting him. This person is clearly still completely in the dark about having been chosen as the Aang family's candidate for the God-bestowed gift. Regardless, he picks up the garbage bags Xuan left scattered around, takes out the trash, and returns to his game. He's still intensely focused on the screen, and the action is heating up. It appears he's finally defeated the Lotus Buddha flower, and his skeleton ant has secured the Buddha Heart Lotus egg. He anxiously retrieves the egg and checks the stats. Xuan had mentioned the symbiotic heart of the Buddha Heart Lotus is genuinely valuable. Meanwhile, his silver-winged mosquito larvae is starving and will disappear entirely if it doesn't eat soon. With a defeated sigh, Zhou decides to feed the larvae first. The moment he confirms, the larvae begins evolving in a brilliant flash of light. Zhou anxiously hopes this will finally cause it to grow larger, but when the process concludes, it remains exactly as small as before. He's already fed it 2 ordinary symbiotic eggs, and it's still a larva. He wonders whether ordinary eggs are simply insufficient nutrition for a legendary creature. Obtaining a legendary symbiotic egg is genuinely difficult, and even farming the skeleton knight repeatedly gives such a low drop rate that it would take an eternity to gather enough. Zhou slumps back on his bed feeling defeated. He reflects on the 3-month deadline Aang Jing has effectively set, and if he can't reach legendary level by then, he's in serious trouble. He also recalls that because he now has the Lost Immortal Sutra, practicing the sun shooting spell is impossible for him anyway. He's still largely in the dark about how the sutra actually works and how he can push beyond his current ceiling. While he's mentally beating himself up over his circumstances, a knock at the door breaks his concentration. He opens it and sees the familiar face of Goa Yang. Zhou asks what he needs. Goa Yang says he's here to apologize. This immediately raises red flags for Zhou. He's unsure what the real motivation behind this visit is. Go Yang continues his explanation, saying there will be no further conflict between them, and he simply wants to put the past behind them and extend the first step toward friendship. Joe accepts the gesture and starts to close the door, mentioning he's in the middle of a game, but Go Yang tells him to wait, there's one more thing. He then takes Joe somewhere and introduces him to his companion, Hyang, explaining he's brought Joe Wen here. Hyang, who is someone new, simply smiles and thanks Go Yang for bringing him. Then Hyang moves with such extraordinary speed that Joe can barely track him, and appears in front of Joe manifesting as a monstrous creature. Joe remains completely composed and tells Hyang that if he genuinely wants to fight, they can settle it properly in the arena. There's no need to make a mess out here. Hyang snaps his fingers and the dark red creature begins dissolving. He compliments Joe on remaining unusually calm and composed. As the dark form fades, we see Hyang arrived with two of his associates. He begins by apologizing for the abrupt display and introduces himself as Wu Hung. Without any delay, he gets straight to the point. He wants Joe to join their team and assist them in taking down the blood-striked Buddha Heart Lotus together. It appears Joe didn't completely destroy the Lotus's core during the previous encounter, which is why it still persists. Joe asks why they're specifically choosing him. Hyang explains he studied the footage of the previous battle carefully. While Xuan's performance was undeniably impressive, it was Joe's tactical judgment and command that Hyang found truly extraordinary. He points out that the college has fighters stronger than Xuan, but what distinguished their previous attempt was Joe's comprehensive situational awareness and how he positioned himself perfectly to neutralize the poison toad at precisely the right moment. Hyang adds that if their third member hadn't betrayed them, Joe's approach would have won the fight. He reassures Joe that he won't need to engage directly with the Lotus Pawn Chaos. All he needs to do is issue tactical guidance and manage their symbiotic pets from a distance. Even after hearing all this, Joe declines internally. His head is more occupied with solving the game boss problem than directing three overconfident seniors. He's also very close to figuring out the Lotus himself and intends to handle it independently. Go Yang tells him to reconsider. Hyang and the other two seniors are all legendary level. Teaming up with them could yield spectacular results quickly, but Joe still refuses, which genuinely frustrates Go Yang. Internally, he notes that if it weren't for Hyang's involvement, he wouldn't have wasted 5 words on this aggravating person. Just then, Hyang stops Joe and reminds him there's no need to refuse so hastily. He asks what Joe actually wants and assures him it can be arranged if it's reasonable. Joe turns around and bluntly states he wants a legendary symbiotic egg. Go Yang is furious at this audacious demand, but Joe stands firm, repeating that he'll join the team if they provide a legendary symbiotic egg. Go Yang grabs Joe by the collar, telling him not to overestimate his value. His contribution to this arrangement is minor, just directing pets from the sideline, and that certainly doesn't warrant a legendary egg. Xuan intervenes and calmly tells Go Yang to step back. It's entirely their choice whether to meet Joe's conditions or not. Either works. Then Hyang steps in directly and asks whether Joe has any specific requirements for the legendary egg. Joe shrugs and says he has no particular preference. He just wants any legendary egg to feed his pet, though he doesn't voice the actual reason. Hyang immediately produces an egg, tosses it toward Joe, and asks whether that's satisfactory. Joe is clearly pleased and has no further demands. A legendary symbiotic egg, essentially for free, is well beyond what he expected. Hyang extends his fist for a bump to finalize the agreement, and Joe reciprocates without hesitation. As they part ways, Go Yang asks Hyang how he could so readily hand over the flaming toxic bee's symbiotic egg. He doesn't understand why Hyang trusts Joe so much. Hyang reminds his friend that after watching the battle footage carefully, he sensed something extraordinary about Joe, almost as if Joe had fought the Lotus before. Go Yang is visibly surprised. Hyang waves the concern away, telling Go Yang not to stress. The egg now serves as a performance guarantee against failure. Back in his room, Joe summons the winged mosquito. Once the little creature appears, Joe produces the legendary symbiotic egg and tosses it directly into the pet's open mouth. Immediately, a massive wave of aura and fire surrounds the little creature as evolution begins. When the transformation concludes, the winged mosquito has emerged with piercing green eyes, a needle-sharp stinger, and an overall dramatically larger frame. Joe finds it fascinating that the evolution appears to have incorporated properties from the flaming toxic bees, likely because both creatures are insects. Checking the stats, he finds the larvae designation is finally gone. The mosquito has fully matured. What genuinely shocks him is how substantially the attributes have improved, pushing almost to the ceiling of what a legendary tier creature can achieve. On top of this, it has gained a new ability called Magic Light Sting, a high-speed energy lance capable of piercing through targeted enemies with extreme precision. Joe can't help grinning at his newly evolved companion. He's now fairly confident it can deal with the blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus. He immediately smears blood on his screen, summons his blood avatar alongside the upgraded mosquito, and sends the mosquito charging at the Lotus without delay. The Lotus isn't about to absorb punishment passively. It conjures its crimson substance and attempts to blast the mosquito from the air. But the mosquito zips through the attack at lightning speed, barely visible to the naked eye. As it closes in, it comes just a hair's width from piercing the flower's eye with its sharp claw, but in a split second, the crafty Lotus ducks beneath the water's surface, leaving the mosquito confused about where it went. Just then the mosquito detects something rising from below. The Lotus attempts an upward ambush, but the mosquito reads it, dodges the incoming petals, and escapes cleanly. The mosquito redirects its attention back to the flower and ramps up its descent, using its silver wing attack and aiming directly at the center. The Lotus tries to shield with its crimson substance, but the mosquito isn't finished. With blinding speed, it circles back and slices through the crimson barrier entirely with its wings. The Lotus looks genuinely frustrated. It then explodes, revealing the toad hidden within, exactly as happened in real life. The toad begins throwing sticky dark sludge at the mosquito, but the creature dodges everything with casual ease. It counters with its sting attack, driving a sharp crimson needle directly into the toad. The toad bursts apart the moment the needle hits, and another sting from the mosquito obliterates the Lotus's core entirely in a massive explosion. As the aftermath settles, the mosquito retrieves the crystal from the smoking wreckage. Joe watches with genuine awe, still half wondering whether his winged mosquito's abilities have truly become this powerful. His pet returns the crystal, spitting it out in front of Joe. He wastes no time grabbing the red crystal, feeling fairly certain that the chai fighting skill of the blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus might be the precise key needed to enter the small Buddhist temple. He absorbs the crystal, and this time the absorption process creates real effects in the physical world as well. It feels like intense, searing heat attempting to cook him from the inside. Joe endures it stoically. Moments later, the system announces that the demonic crystal of the blood-streaked Buddha Heart Lotus has been fully absorbed, and his original meditation skill has been upgraded to an enhanced version known as blood meditation. Once the process concludes, Joe's body is still visibly steaming. He wrings out his drenched shirt and activates the newly upgraded blood meditation skill. As expected, the chai consumption rate under blood meditation is significantly lower than standard meditation, allowing him to sustain the state for approximately half an hour. He's now feeling genuinely optimistic that this skill will allow him to explore the small Buddhist temple effectively. Without wasting a moment, he dives back into the game. He finally crosses the staircase in underground Buddha City with renewed energy and no signs of exhaustion. The enhanced meditation resistance is visibly working, helping him withstand whatever force permeates this area. After several minutes of running, he finally reaches the main entrance of the small Buddhist temple. He's noticeably nervous before stepping in. He has no idea what kinds of entities might be inside. He enters anyway. After looking around carefully, he's oddly unsettled to find zero-dimensional creatures anywhere. Then he spots a carved stone slab on the far side bearing inscribed Chinese text. The title on the slab identifies it as the Short Sutra on Perfect Wisdom. This triggers a memory. The large sutra on perfect wisdom is a well-documented historical artifact. According to legend, a Buddhist master discovered it during a dimensional storm, and it was classified as one of the 2 greatest chi spell arts in all of Buddhism. He's immediately certain this shortened version must also be a chai spell. The moment he tries to read the inscription, the words begin writhing and twisting on the slab, and a brutal headache detonates behind his eyes, like something is attempting to scramble his brain entirely. He clutches his head in agony, but then something begins glowing brilliantly at the center of his avatar's chest. In the next moment, the crushing pressure vanishes completely. He notices the circulation speed of the Immortal Sutra has slowed and the discomfort has disappeared. He attempts to read the inscription again. Just as he's beginning to make sense of things, he notices his chi bar is depleting rapidly. He hasn't even entered the main hall yet. He breaks into a run immediately. Standing outside the Buddhist hall, he pushes the door open and spots a colossal statue bearing 3 Buddha faces. He's not entirely sure whether a 3-faced Buddha is theologically accurate, but the moment he steps inside, his avatar begins twisting and the game ends. Dead again, without any clear warning. He's going to need to investigate more thoroughly before attempting to enter the temple again. At least this experience gave him some insight into what the predecessors who sought power here must have endured. They genuinely risked their lives for this, and he's starting to genuinely respect that. Even with blood meditation, he still couldn't enter the main hall, but the absence of any dimensional creatures strongly suggests that accessing the temple is somehow connected to that stone tablet. He's fairly certain the tablet is some kind of chi spell, but since he's already practicing the Lost Immortal Sutra, he can't take on another chi spell right now. Still, he decides to memorize the sutra inscribed on it. Surprisingly, retaining this content comes considerably more easily than the Lost Immortal Sutra did. Once he's memorized approximately half of it, he retreats from the small Buddhist temple's vicinity before his chi depletes entirely. He plans to return and finish reading once his chi has recovered. He spends the entire day cycling through this pattern, yawning continuously and grinding relentlessly in the game. By day's end, he's finally memorized the complete sutra. Suddenly, radiant light begins emanating from him, and he's completely stunned by the new variety of chi now circulating through his core. The only explanation he can think of is that this must be the short sutra on perfect wisdom he just committed to memory. Looking at his hand in the real world, he can also feel this new chi spell activating. Even though he hasn't formally practiced it, it's circulating through his body automatically from memory alone. He has no idea what's happening, but he's far too exhausted to investigate further right now. He decides to sleep and will figure it out in the morning. Just as he begins drifting off to sleep, mysterious patterns begin materializing across his well-defined physique. After sleeping, Joe heads to the bathroom in the morning. As water pours over him, he lets out a startled yell. His skin is shedding. He steps out of the bath wondering whether this is a side effect of the short sutra on perfect wisdom circulating through his body. Regardless, he picks up his phone and checks his stats. To his surprise, the Lost Immortal Sutra hasn't been replaced at all. Instead, his constitution has broken through the 10-point ceiling and risen to 11. Not only that, he can distinctly feel the short sutra on perfect wisdom circulating alongside the Lost Immortal Sutra simultaneously. Then something completely mind-blowing registers. He can apparently circulate his newly acquired chi with the Lost Immortal Sutra as a medium, replacing and channeling it simultaneously. This means he's effectively mastered 2 chi spells at once. This is an enormous achievement. Most chi spells are fundamentally incompatible in nature, making simultaneous operation extremely difficult. The more advanced and complex the chi spells involved, the harder coexistence becomes. Just then his phone rings. It's Hyang, reminding him that they've already arrived at the Lotus Pond to challenge the flower and asking why Joe hasn't shown up yet. It appears Joe got so absorbed in grinding that he completely forgot he had a commitment to honor. He rushes to the Lotus Pond shortly after. Arriving there, he sees the assault on the Lotus Flower's core is already underway. Joe is the one calling all the tactical shots, and under his precise guidance the team successfully obliterates the blob protecting the core. Joe immediately instructs everyone to pull back at least 20 meters. The creatures begin withdrawing, but then one particularly overconfident team member insists they should deliver the final devastating blow right now instead of retreating. This rowdy individual takes personal command and orders his flying creatures to launch a blood blade rain. The birds release their feathers, which begin tearing through the area. A massive explosion detonates across the zone, and one of the birds gets caught in the explosion and is instantly reduced to ash. The overconfident guy falls silent after this catastrophic blunder. Joe makes it clear he will not be covering the cost of that lost creature since the man specifically ignored his instructions. The chastened man apologizes and admits it was entirely his fault. When the lotus flower finally crumbles to ash and debris, 2 teachers standing near the tunnel entrance observe the aftermath. The blonde teacher feels a pang of envy that someone like Joe will be one of her students. The bespectacled teacher remarks that Joe's behavior throughout gives the impression he somehow knew in advance that the Buddha Heart Lotus would explode at the critical moment. She notes that in the military's Western District Department, defeating the Buddha Heart Lotus required sacrificing 5 legendary-level creatures. The blonde teacher suggests that given Joe's connection to the Aang family, it's reasonable to assume he received intelligence from them. The other teacher counters that Aang Jing and her brother don't particularly like Joe. They wouldn't share information without substantial justification. This only makes her more curious about him and more eager to learn what makes him tick. Back in the game, inside the Lotus Pond dungeon, the toad has been activated and is launching those dark gooey blobs, but Joe's winged mosquito evades them effortlessly and finishes the toad with a clean wing strike. The mosquito follows with its magic light sting, which detonates in a massive explosion. Joe is quite pleased to find that his knowledge of the Lotus's attack patterns combined with the mosquito's upgraded capabilities makes defeating this boss remarkably consistent. Suddenly, his phone registers a new loot drop, a symbiotic egg of the blood-striped Buddha heart lotus. He picks it up and finds it's an alchemy-level egg with respectable attributes. However, he also discovers that while the real lotus commands multiple chi fighting skills, this game version is weaker and possesses only one. Since hatching it carries risk, and he doesn't want to end up with a Buddha heart lotus larvae, he considers fusing it instead, but the fusion rate is abysmal. Then another system window catches his eye, suggesting he feed the egg directly to the silver-winged mosquito. He recalls that the last time he fed his mosquito a legendary egg, it evolved dramatically, so he wonders if the same will happen again. He presses feed, but nothing particularly notable happens. It looks like he might have just wasted a legendary egg, and he's left completely baffled about what it actually takes to grow this creature further. In the next scene, his avatar is running toward the small Buddhist temple. As he nears the entrance, he quickly switches his active chi spell to the short wisdom sutra and is pleased to see that circulating it is working perfectly. Once inside, he spots the Buddha statue again. Suddenly, something begins dripping from the statue and a magical formation starts shimmering directly beneath his blood avatar. He tenses, worried he's triggered another instant kill mechanism, but to his surprise, nothing happens. Instead, a cluster of blobs surrounds him. Taking a closer look, he realizes they're symbiotic eggs. A system window appears displaying unusual text. According to the postscript, the Buddha statue represents one of the 5 wisdom kings in Buddhism, beings who have conquered the 3 realms of desire, form, and formlessness. The Buddha is offering him an egg. Joe finds it peculiar that a statue would offer free symbiotic eggs. When he tries to examine the egg's attributes, the system displays them as unknown. He decides to pick one of the 3 eggs at random. The moment he makes his selection, the system announces that a mythical creature hatching has been confirmed. Joe becomes absolutely furious and throws his phone across the room. He never confirmed anything. It's not that he doesn't want a mythical creature. They're extraordinarily powerful in dimensional combat. The problem is that even legendary creature hatching nearly killed him. A mythical hatching might literally be fatal. But since the process has already been triggered, the pain begins. A dark red substance starts constricting around him, and he's genuinely concerned about becoming the first recorded person to die from playing a video game. A while later, he's sprawled on the ground looking like something the universe thoroughly wrung out and discarded. He's genuinely baffled to still be alive. He can also feel that his blood and chi have been significantly drained from his body. It was presumably worth it though. He would never have obtained something this adorably soft and fluffy otherwise. The creature is named Ding. He's initially confused. A mythical creature is supposed to be a devastating force of nature capable of catastrophic destruction, but this tiny little thing doesn't match that description at all. He picks up his phone and checks its stats. Here's the troubling part. The system describes this creature as ordinary at its primary stage. What shocks him most is that even as an ordinary creature, all of its attributes are already in double digits, which seems anything but ordinary. He was told it was mythical and now feels like he's been conned by his own game system. Regardless, he starts contemplating the system's mention of the primary stage and wonders if this creature can grow similarly to how the silver-winged mosquito did. In mythology, the white dog of Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha could perceive all things in heaven and earth, and in Journey to the West, Ding could distinguish the real Monkey King from the 6-eared macaque when even the greatest gods couldn't. This little creature looks quite different from what any mythology would have predicted, however. He then checks out its symbiotic form, and the creature transforms into an ear-piercing ring. The moment the ring's effects activate, he can perceive his surroundings with dramatically heightened acuity. He can even hear people in adjacent dormitory rooms with perfect clarity. That's when he catches the sound of Jing, who seems to be groaning with considerable intensity. This makes him momentarily suspect she might be enjoying some solitary entertainment, and he immediately feels like a pervert for eavesdropping. He tries to refocus, but her groans are growing more intense, and she genuinely sounds like she's in real distress. He quickly moves to her dormitory room and starts pounding on the door, asking if she's alright. When there's no response, he starts worrying something genuinely serious has happened. Determined to help, he takes a running start and charges at the door like a bull, but he still can't break through. This is Jing's room, and her security door is effectively a reinforced wall. Meanwhile, Jing is lying on the floor inside, completely baffled about how he can possibly hear her. She absolutely doesn't want him seeing her in this current state. Before he can actually batter through the door, Jing quickly tells him to stop. The pounding ceases immediately, but Joe, ever the determined rescuer, decides to enter through the window instead, leaving Jing utterly baffled. Once inside, he asks if she's okay. and Jing is completely mortified to see him and demands to know how he got in through the window. Joe, completely oblivious, replies that he thought she was in danger since nobody answered the door and says he'll call a doctor if she needs one. The girl quickly panics and assures him she's been through this many times before and will be perfectly fine shortly. That's when this complete idiot asks her outright whether she's on her period. She glares at him like he's the most obtuse person who has ever existed, throws a mug at his face, and reluctantly confirms that yes, she is. She then physically shoves him out of the room and slams the door. Joe has thoroughly misread the entire situation. Meanwhile, inside the room, and Jing slides down against the door to the floor, utterly embarrassed and blushing furiously after the mortifying encounter. Joe returns to his dormitory room and begins preparing food, specifically choosing red dates to help his body replenish. His phone starts buzzing, and when he answers, it's Xuan. The playboy informs him that the new semester begins today and every club on campus is actively recruiting new members. He suggests they walk around campus, explore, and meet people. Joe states he has no interest in joining any clubs. Xuan responds that they could work together. He's planning to establish his own club and promises to help Joe climb through the ranks if he joins. Xuan then makes a more substantive argument. They need organized teams to complete most of the tasks the college assigns. He reminds Joe that nobody wanted to team up with them during the real combat test and asks whether Joe wants to relive that scenario again. That actually resonates. Joe eventually gives in but points out that just the two of them aren't enough to establish a club. Xuan simply says they'll work it out later. The scene shifts outside where students are gathering in the main square of the college campus. Joe feels overwhelmed by the crowd. He spots Xuan standing on the steps calling out to him, accompanied by a lady. When they meet up, Xuan immediately asks why Joe is carrying a bag. Joe explains it contains red dates and wolfberry tea to help replenish his blood. The lady then suggests that since Joe is already here, he should join Wang's club. They have many wonderful members and would be happy to have him. Wang, of course, is Xuan's sister, which is precisely why Xuan immediately protests, saying Joe will be joining his club instead. He asks his sister pointedly whether she's trying to lure his friend away with a group of attractive women and makes it clear they're not falling for it. Despite his firm words, it's abundantly obvious from how he's practically drooling that he's personally very tempted. Joe clarifies that he can't join Wang's club, not because the proposition isn't appealing in various ways, but because he's already committed to Xuan's club. Wang's companion graciously accepts and says she looks forward to cooperating with Xuan's club when opportunities arise. This particular brother just gives his sister an enthusiastic thumbs up while Joe remains standing in silence. Once the women have departed, Xuan jokes about how Joe just let a wonderful group slip away. Joe tells him to be serious and asks whether Xuan is genuinely committed to launching a real club, because they need to recruit members quickly before all the freshmen commit elsewhere. Xuan then explains the procedural issue. Freshmen have to wait a full month before they can formally apply to establish a club, and they also need a minimum of 5 members. They don't currently qualify for anything. Joe, annoyed, asks what they're even doing here if they can't establish a club. Xuan replies with complete transparency that they're here to check out the female students, obviously. Joe is even more irritated now, realizing he could have been in a club with multiple attractive women, but instead ended up here supporting Xuan's establishment that doesn't even exist yet. Then a familiar voice calls out from somewhere in the crowd. Joe turns and is surprised to see 2 of his former classmates standing in front of him. He had no idea they'd all end up at Sunset College. Xuan nearly launches himself across the space when he spots a girl in shorts and immediately asks Joe who this remarkable person is. Joe introduces her as Fang Ruoxi and mentions they attended the same high school. Xuan then edges closer to Joe and whispers that it's incomprehensible how Joe could have attended school with someone like this and not taken advantage of the opportunity. Even if he missed it then, Xuan is glad to encounter someone like Ruoxi now and immediately invites her to join his club. To the playboy's genuine surprise, she agrees right away. The idiot then remembers to inform her that they can't formally start the club for another month, so she'd need to wait a bit. The girl agrees to wait and then approaches Joe directly. She bows in front of him and sincerely apologizes for leaving him without a team during the college entrance exam. She knows it might have cost him his opportunity to participate properly. Xuan watches this exchange with fascination, wondering privately whether she chose Sunset College specifically because of Joe. Joe forgives her and says it wasn't entirely her fault. The blonde teammate also steps up awkwardly and says they had no choice back then, but promises things will be different going forward. Xuan then tells everyone to drop the formalities since they're all friends now. He points out it's getting late and suggests they head back to rest up for tomorrow's combat test. Joe is mildly surprised. A combat test on the very first day of college. He wonders whether it's another trip to Buddha City. Shoen clarifies they won't be going to Buddha City since it's a newly discovered zone with too many unknown dangers. The college would never send freshmen in there. Ruoxi then explains that based on previous years, the college typically selects one of 4 stable dimensional realms for the freshman examination. The objective is simply to defeat a dimensional creature, with the score determined by how many are taken down. Joe is curious how she knows so much, and she casually points out that all the information is posted on the college's dimensional forum. After they part ways, Joe walks quietly and reflects on what he's learned about the dimensional forum. Established by the Federation to encourage information sharing about various dimensional realms, registration doesn't require real identity verification, and both military and civilian users can post whatever they know. He never paid much attention to it during his time at Goa High, since they rarely dealt with complex dimensional zones. He never expected that everyone at Sunset College would be using the forum this actively. He's now thinking it might be worth learning the rules and contributing himself. As he's absorbed in his phone, someone nearby calls out to him, asking if he's one of the special admitted students in their building. Joe looks around for the source and only then realizes there's a short girl standing directly in front of him. He failed to notice her because of the considerable vertical distance involved. He greets her and introduces himself as Joe Wen, mentioning he lives on the 2nd floor. The girl, full of bubbly enthusiasm, introduces herself as Wangle, also a special admitted student. She mentions she lives on the 1st floor, making them neighbors. But the moment he registers her energy level, Joe vanishes practically instantaneously, leaving only the sound of a closing door. Wangle stands there, having apparently discovered she has a very unusual neighbor. Joe puts away his bag, fires up his computer, and dives headfirst into the dimensional forum. He discovers it's a massive open information sharing platform that anyone can access. The college, military, and people from every background regularly post dimensional information on this site. He's genuinely astonished that a platform this large doesn't require real name registration, and that the Federation isn't concerned about hostile actors or enemies accessing it freely. On top of that, there's a generous reward system where all kinds of resources can be traded using dimensional points earned through contributions. The ways to earn points are layered. Regular posts earn points based on click volume, but this only produces a modest yield even with thousands of readers. For substantially higher returns, users can post paid content. These paid posts can cover any topic and the author sets their own price, but because the forum is anonymous, users are generally wary of paying for information from accounts with no reputation history. The Federation and college also publish strategy guides as paid content, typically at low point costs. Joe mulls over what kind of posts he should create, and the answer doesn't take long to arrive. He dives in and creates his first post. Meanwhile, a teacher is lounging on her bed, sipping tea and scrolling through the forum. She's wading through the usual sea of freshmen trying to look impressive when she stumbles upon something that genuinely catches her attention. It doesn't take her long to realize this is a strategy guide for the small Buddhist temple, priced at 20,000 dimensional points. Her jaw nearly drops. That's an impossibly specific topic. How could anyone posting on an anonymous account know anything about the small Buddhist temple? The entire surrounding area has been classified as a restricted zone, and all related information has been suppressed. Even most teachers are unaware the temple exists by name. She suspects it might be a scam. The account is brand new after all. But if this information is genuine, it could fundamentally change how the military approaches their explorations. Out of pure curiosity, she spends the 20,000 points, and the information materializes before her. She learns that consuming chi through absorbing Buddha Heart Lotus dimensional crystals using the meditation skill can resist the mysterious force in front of the temple that twists people's internal organs. The higher the crystal's level, the longer the resistance effect lasts. The teacher finds this deeply strange. Nobody intelligent enough to explore that area would bother practicing a basic chi fighting skill, and even if you offered this technique for free, nobody would voluntarily spend the time learning it. She wonders whether she's been deceived. Meanwhile, Joe is back in the game grinding against the Skeleton Knight repeatedly. After farming the boss multiple times, he finally scores a symbiotic egg as a loot drop. He feeds it directly to his little creature and tells it to grow up properly instead of just eating constantly. He's tired of farming the Skeleton Knight, so he decides to venture deeper into the map. As he flies around the area, he's puzzled to find no skeleton soldiers anywhere despite having pushed significantly further into the zone. Then he spots something completely unexpected on the ground below, a massive tower from an ancient imperial city, identified as Yanbo Tower. This surprises him considerably. For context, Yanbo was the son of Emperor Yo, one of the 5 prehistoric emperors, and represented the fire deity. The tower, historically described as the fire god's astronomical observatory, is supposed to be located in the southwest region outside ancient Gua City. According to every history book, it absolutely should not appear inside the ancient city as rendered in this game. He's completely bewildered by why this iconic structure is here. Suddenly something launches from the tower and immediately begins tracking him. It appears to be a fiery bird of some kind, and it swoops at him with the speed of a bullet. He immediately assumes a defensive stance and deploys his ash palm, but the eagle-like flaming creature pierces straight through it as though his strike hit empty air. The bird zips past him, and in the next instant, its fire incinerates his avatar completely. He drains an energy drink, sets down the empty glass, and jumps back into the game. He's determined to defeat whatever this new monster is. This time he mounts his winged mosquito's symbiotic form. However, since the mosquito excels at low altitude with extreme agility, he can't fly directly above the Yanbo Tower to observe what's happening. His immediate problem is the relentless monster chasing him from behind. He needs to shake it off before anything else. He recalls something from when the firebird first attacked him. After the mosquito dodged clear, the bird appeared to prioritize targeting whoever was closest to the Yanbo Tower. With this in mind, he decides to deliberately use himself as bait. He reaches a certain altitude and deactivates the symbiotic form, beginning to fall without wings. The fiery bird immediately redirects toward him, and his winged mosquito swoops in from the side and takes the firebird down with a single strike. The mosquito's magic light sting clearly works against these creatures, even though his ash palm was completely ineffective. He's also curious why the system hasn't announced the creature's defeat. Regardless, he starts climbing the tower stairs. Then he spots 2 more fiery birds converging on him. He immediately sends the silver-winged mosquito to intercept and draw their attention, clearing his path so he can ascend as rapidly as possible. The climb isn't as smooth as hoped. The fire at the top of the tower begins reacting again, and multiple fiery birds start converging on him simultaneously. Instead of backing down, he goes completely full throttle. He launches into the air and pushes through the birds using his ash palm to propel himself past them. Just as he nears the top of the tower, he begins making out a Chinese character inscribed beneath the intense flames. But before he can fully read it, a massive explosion detonates around him, and the game session ends. The character he glimpsed translates to Imperial in English, but he still can't determine what its presence in this context means. He knows this dungeon is supposed to be modeled on the real ancient Gua City, yet in the game it's designated as the ancient Imperial City for reasons he doesn't understand. He also notes that after taking down the firebirds, the system never announced their defeat. His suspicion is that they might have been summoned through some kind of Chai fighting skill, rather than being independent monsters, which raises the question of what awaits him when he eventually confronts whoever summoned them. He's certain the Fire God Tower harbors significant secrets, but he currently lacks the means to explore them further. While browsing the forum, he notices he's accumulated 20,000 dimensional points twice over. Earning through the forum is more straightforward than he anticipated, but his satisfaction is interrupted by a direct message. Someone wants to discuss the small Buddhist temple. On the other end of the screen, the sender is waiting impatiently. Earlier, she had consulted her senior and shared everything she learned. That meditation appears to help resist the mysterious force guarding the temple. Her senior confirmed that they've tested meditation and it does in fact work, but they're both deeply curious about who this unknown account holder is and how they possess such specific knowledge about a classified location. The senior also dropped a significant piece of information. There's a stone tablet in front of the temple bearing a Chai spell inscription. Similar tablets have been found in other dimensional realms as well. Apparently someone once practiced the Chai spell from such a tablet and gained mysterious abilities, but the circumstances are considerably more complex than that. The senior specifically mentioned that the short sutra on perfect wisdom on the tablet has something uniquely strange about it. Some volunteers attempted to memorize the inscription and all of them died in the process. The subordinate is stunned by this. The senior instructs her to extract more useful information from whoever posted this, so in the present moment, she's waiting anxiously for Joe's response. Joe finally replies. She immediately asks whether he knows the short sutra on perfect wisdom. Joe confirms he does, which only deepens her suspicion that this person has intimate knowledge of the small Buddhist temple. While she's formulating her next response, Joe is simultaneously connecting the dots himself. She asks how he learned to practice the short sutra on perfect wisdom and offers to pay a premium price for this information. Joe realizes that he himself doesn't actually know the mechanism by which he managed to practice it. He recalls nearly being destroyed by the headache when he tried to read the inscription, and only avoided losing consciousness because the lost immortal sutra that was already circulating in him somehow neutralized the effect. That's it. The lost immortal sutra is what made it possible. He finally understands how he did it. He stands up quickly and tells her he simply can't assist with this. He closes the forum tab without another word. The next day, students have gathered in the college. Shuan is greeting Joe in the morning. Joe looks completely drained and barely conscious. Shuan gives him a brief pep talk, telling him not to completely destroy himself gaming all night. It's true, Joe spent the entire night pushing deeper into the ant nest dungeon and came away with nothing meaningful. Even with the silver-winged mosquito capable of fighting and defeating the black mosquitoes, the ordinary skeleton enemies and Joe's own avatar are consistently too fragile compared to the opposition, and the loot obtained hasn't been worth the effort. Once everyone is settled in the classroom, a stunning teacher with black hair strides in, drawing every pair of eyes in the room. She greets everyone with tremendous energy and introduces herself as Wangf, which literally translates to King's Concubine. As energetic as she appears, the circles under her eyes betray that she spent the entire night waiting for a reply from the mysterious forum user, who is of course Joe. Their playboy classmate, being completely himself, raises his hand and asks whether he can be the king she serves. The teacher agrees and explains that if he passes her examinations and graduates successfully, he's welcome to be. After some playful back and forth, she gets down to serious business. She informs the class that the entrance examination requires them to eliminate one demonized general in Tiger Cage Pass within 10 days. They can form teams of up to 4 students. She specifies that they must complete the task within 1.5 minutes. Otherwise, expulsion follows. The entire class erupts in panic. Some students immediately remind her that they're still at the mortal level, and this seems physically impossible. She calmly tells them that 10 days is more than sufficient as long as they take it seriously. She announces that Tiger Cage Pass will be open for entry over the next 10 days, and she hopes to see everyone again when the time comes. Shuan looks just as bewildered as everyone else and admits that defeating demonized generals in Tiger Cage Pass sounds absolutely impossible. Joe, not knowing what these creatures are, asks why they're considered so difficult. Shuan explains that Tiger Cage Pass was an ancient battlefield in antiquity, so the creatures residing there are exceptionally powerful. Among legendary-level creatures, demonized generals rank above average, and some especially formidable demonized generals have reached the very upper tier of the legendary level. Since most freshmen are still in the mortal cultivation stage, this test is extraordinarily demanding. Joe concludes the smartest approach is to visit Tiger Cage Pass in person and assess the situation directly. The next scene takes us to a faculty office where a male teacher is having a word with Wangf. He points out that assigning such a challenging test to special admitted students who are ultimately still ordinary students might not be the most appropriate choice. Wangf acknowledges his concern but says she's already posted detailed information about the demonized generals on the Dimensional Forum. As long as the students do their research, completing the task isn't actually unreasonable. She clarifies that she isn't trying to force any dropouts. She simply wants the students to maintain humility and avoid arrogance or overconfidence, because what they'll face in the future will be far more demanding than this exam ever could be. Back with the boys, they're now standing at the entrance to Tiger Cage Pass. Stepping inside, they find themselves in a desert environment populated by strange sand-dweller types wandering around. These are apparently the demonized soldiers, and Shuan is visibly unimpressed, since they were hoping to locate demonized generals specifically. He turns to Joe and suggests pushing deeper to find some generals. But Joe flat out refuses, saying he wants to play it safe and not risk their lives unnecessarily. He points out they know very little about this environment, and he can't be the one running to rescue this playboy every single time. Shuan calls him a spoilsport, and Joe simply starts walking on his own to explore separately. As he wanders around, we learn that Joe is actively searching for a dungeon emblem to scan into his phone. He figures that if dungeons exist in underground Buddha City and ancient Gua City, this place should have one too. His eyes land on a nearby statue, and squinting carefully, he spots the familiar palm-shaped emblem. He immediately pulls out his phone and scans it. A while later, other students have already begun engaging the demonized soldiers, and Shuan is watching from an elevated position with visible disappointment. He can tell these demonized soldiers are thoroughly underwhelming. barely a threat to someone at his level. It's honestly a little amusing given how cautiously Joe was treating this location. Speaking of Joe, he returns and tells Xuan it's time to leave. Xuan turns around and agrees, but the moment he sees his friend's expression, unusually and suspiciously pleased, a chill runs down his spine. As they exit through the gate, Xuan can't resist pointing out how strangely happy Joe seems. Joe outwardly denies everything, but internally he's absolutely elated. He's just found a brand new dungeon to add to his collection.